Hey guys. Tonight we're slipping quietly into a world where thorns bloom on every banner. And every whisper could cost a crown. You're here with me, settling into the dim hush of your room while we wander back to the dying breaths of a civil war that England probably should have taken a rain check on. As you ease deeper into the blankets, imagine the clash of red and white roses. Symbols so delicate you'd think they were designed for a perfume commercial. Not a brutal decades-long conflict. If you ever wished for medieval life, trust me, you wouldn't last a day. You'd be crying for Wi-Fi and indoor plumbing before breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a slow breath as you step into the remains of the battlefield that England has tiptoed through for nearly 30 years. The air feels heavy, like walking into a room where two people just had a dramatic argument but are pretending everything is fine. Only here, the arguments involved swords, longbows, and the occasional betrayal over a cup of wine. You tread through those echoes carefully, feeling the tension under your feet, like an old wooden floorboard that creaks just enough to remind you it's seen things. The War of the Roses wasn't some pretty, flowery feud. It was a messy, family-sized meltdown between the houses of Lancaster and York, both claiming they had better paperwork for the throne. And sure, medieval genealogy can be complicated, but this was less family tree and more family tumbleweed. Rolling around and crashing into everyone. You can almost smell the exhaustion of a country that just wants someone, anyone, to stop the endless tug of war and send everybody home. As you walk along this fading battlefield, you're stepping into the aftermath of a struggle that shaped everything that comes later. The red rose of Lancaster, the white rose of York, symbols that would later make fantastic wallpaper patterns but at this moment represent nothing but blood, fear, and too many funerals. There's a sense that everyone, from nobles in velvet to farmers with mud-caked boots, is just tired, properly tired, the kind of tired where even your bones want a nap. You stop for a moment, hearing the distant rattle of armor. It's the dying echo of the last push between Edward IV's legacy and the hopes of the Yorkists who supported his young sons. Those same princes who vanished mysteriously in the Tower. A well-known event, sure, but when you stand here, even in memory, it feels different, colder, sharper. You glance toward where the tower once loomed in political shadow. And you can't help picturing those boys disappearing from history like someone forgot to hit save on the document. Some historians still argue about whether Richard III actually ordered their deaths, or whether someone else stepped in with their own agenda. Historians argue about a lot of things. To be fair, especially when the sources are about as reliable as your friend who swears they only had one drink. But here, tonight, you're just letting the fog of uncertainty swirl around you as you walk deeper into the tangle of the era. The truth is, the kingdom at this moment feels cracked, splintered, and you sense those cracks under your feet like fault lines ready to shake history awake. Everywhere you turn, there's a scrap of a story. A noble house ruined by choosing the wrong rose. A knight who switched sides twice, maybe 3 times, because loyalty was flexible and survival more valuable. You even catch a faint whiff of something odd and slightly sweet in the air. Medieval camps sometimes burned bundles of juniper to mask the scent of fear, sweat, and disease. That little detail clings to the night like an old secret. One of those strange truths no one writes ballads about. You walk further, brushing your fingers against a torn standard hanging from a cracked pole. The red rose stitched into it is faded, frayed at the edges. It shouldn't feel alive, but somehow it still hums with the memory of hands that raised it high. You feel the exhaustion of the realm settling into your shoulders, the way the land itself seems to sigh. Yet beneath all the ruin, there's the slightest tremble, like the heartbeat of something new. A lineage no one here truly expects. A family still lingering in the margins. Technically legitimate enough. Technically noble enough. Technically related to the crown. If you squint hard, you can practically hear the scribes muttering, well, if you stretch the family tree at a weird angle, maybe it works, and you smile a little, because that's the first quiet sign of the Tudors slipping into the cracks. You feel a breeze, a soft one, brushing past like the lift of a curtain revealing a backstage scene. Somewhere in that wind is the knowledge that the red rose, though battered, isn't finished, and the Yorkists, despite their claims, their banners, their victories, aren't done either. The landscape feels like a chessboard just after someone knocked half the pieces over but insists on continuing the game. You step toward the remnants of a campfire. Ash scattered like gray snow. A boot print still remains, half preserved in the mud. You crouch beside it, imagining the soldier who left it, someone who lived their entire life under banners they didn't choose. Someone who probably didn't care which rose won as long as the harvest came in on time. This war wasn't just fought by kings. It was carried on the backs of thousands who never asked to be part of it. And in that stillness, you sense something faintly hopeful. The war is not yet over, but the end is creeping closer. Soft as a candle guttering low, an entire generation has been born and raised under the shadow of roses. And they're ready, achingly ready, for something different, something sturdier than petals and pride. They just don't know it yet. You rise, brushing off your hands, and feel the story shifting beneath you. The roses may be wilting, but something else is germinating through the soil. A dynasty rising not from pristine lineage or unbreakable right, but from persistence, luck, and a handful of improbable opportunities. A dynasty that will reshape England in ways no one here could imagine. But for now, you stay in this moment, standing on the cooling ashes of a feud that has defined a generation. The moon hangs low, pale as a Yorkist banner, watching you with patient, ancient eyes, and as you look back across the trampled ground, you realize you're not just witnessing an ending. You're witnessing a beginning disguised as one. The roses are fading, but the story is only opening its first page. You keep walking through the dim afterglow of those fading roses, and the ground beneath your feet begins to shift, not literally. Don't worry, you're not about to fall into a medieval sinkhole. It's more of a soft tilt in the air. A gentle turn of attention toward a quieter corner of the map. You feel the landscape stretching westward, past the rolling fields scarred by York and Lancaster, toward a rougher, greener, slightly moodier land where rain is practically a national personality trait. Wales. And you can sense it in your breath, the difference. The air thickens a little, scented with moss, stone, and stubborn resilience. You're stepping into a place where legends are carried on mountain winds, where old lineages cling to memory like ivy on castle walls, and where one unassuming family thread will someday tug at the entire fabric of England. It's almost funny. You think, while the mighty houses of York and Lancaster tear each other to shreds, the future quietly hums in the hills, unnoticed, like a phone vibrating in someone else's pocket. Your footsteps soften as you move through a Welsh village that exists now only in echoes. The cottages are low, stone-built, smoky from hearths that never truly go out. Chickens scatter around your ankles, giving you looks that suggest they know more about politics than half the nobles back in London. A dog barks in the distance, the sound bouncing off the cliffs like a warning or maybe a cheerful greeting. It's sometimes hard to tell with Welsh dogs. Somewhere in this rugged calm, the Tudor story begins to stir, not as a dramatic prophecy or a lightning bolt in the sky, but as a simple lineage, one branch of many from an old Welsh family that traced its roots to princes of Gwynedd. Most people wouldn't have given them more than a polite nod. After all, Wales wasn't exactly dictating English crowns at the time. It was mostly just trying to keep itself from being stepped on by its bigger, louder neighbor. But you feel it. This is where the thread starts tugging. You pause near the outline of an old manor, or what used to be one, its stones sunk into earth, swallowed by moss as though the landscape decided it was time for a nap. Inside rooms long vanished. A generation of Tudors lived with a sense of pride that bordered on cheerful delusion. They believed themselves descended from ancient Welsh heroes. Maybe they exaggerated, maybe they didn't. Some historians still argue about how legitimate those claims were, usually in tones that suggest someone spilled juice on their research notes. But legitimacy, as you've already learned from the roses, is more about who outlasts whom than who has the fanciest family tree. You brush your fingers across a cold stone, imagining it as the wall of the house where young Owen Tudor once wandered. He wasn't born with a roadmap to power. He was born with a Welsh name, a modest background, and an impressive mustache, if the portraits can be trusted. Which, to be fair, is questionable. Yet somehow, this quietly determined man found his way into the English court. Not as a lord, not as a noble, but as a servant to the Queen Dowager, Catherine of Valois. And that's where the story starts to warm under your feet, like a hearth recently stirred. Because from all the options Catherine of Valois had, powerful lords, influential advisors, wealthier men, she fell in love with Owen Tudor, a Welshman, a servant, a man whose greatest political power at that point was probably folding linens exceptionally well. Their marriage, though wrapped in secrecy and controversy, birthed children who would carry his name into the heart of English history. A romance between a Queen Dowager and a Welsh courtier isn't just unusual, it's downright improbable. The kind of plot twist even modern TV writers would hesitate to use because it feels too convenient. Too neat, but it happened. And you can almost sense the ghost of that unlikely affection lingering in the hills around you. A tender defiance against a world that thought lineage was everything. A reminder that dynasties sometimes begin not with conquest, but with two people looking at each other and thinking, yeah, Let's do something ridiculous. As you move through the village, a drizzle begins, soft at first, then steady, as if Wales is naturally incapable of staying dry for more than 5 consecutive minutes. The droplets tap gently against your shoulders, and you let the coolness sink into your senses. Everything here feels honest, humble, weathered, and that's the heart of this thread. The Tudors weren't born in gold-leafed chambers beneath frescoed ceilings. They were born in a land that laughed at pretension. You follow a narrow path into the hills where sheep roam freely, their woolly selves completely uninterested in human politics. One of them stares at you with an expression that clearly says, "You think you know history, don't you?" And you do your best to look confident while stepping carefully, because these hills can be steep. And the last thing you need is to slide down in front of judgmental livestock. Up here, the wind carries murmurs of Welsh poets reciting genealogies, of bards insisting that the Tudors' ancestors were far grander than anyone previously claimed. Some of those poems read like medieval marketing pamphlets. But you forgive them. After all, storytelling is the backbone of identity in Wales. And maybe, just maybe, those myths gave the Tudors the confidence they needed to survive the storms ahead. You reach a high ridge, and the view widens. You can almost map out how this humble line will someday weave itself into England's destiny. The hills cradled the legacy like a secret, nurturing it without fanfare. No rose banners here, no armies marching, just rain, stone, and an unspoken certainty that even the smallest, quietest beginnings can bloom into something enormous. As you inhale the crisp, wet air, another odd detail brushes your thoughts. Welsh soldiers in this era often carried small wooden charms carved with symbols for protection, spirals, knots, animals. It's one of those strange little truths that rarely makes the textbooks, but somehow fits perfectly with the world under your feet. A place where hope is held not in crowns but in pockets. You take another step, and the mist seems to close behind you like a curtain. The thread is now firmly in your hand, leading you onward. The roses may have wilted, but here, in these rugged hills, the next chapter germinates, quietly, steadily, and with more stubbornness than any kingdom expects. The rise won't be quick. It won't even be logical. But the seed is planted, and you can feel history beginning to hum beneath the rain. You follow that quiet Welsh thread as it winds out of the hills and into a broader, louder horizon, one where the air thickens with the weight of ambition. The drizzle fades behind you, replaced by something sharper, something restless, and before you even see him, you feel the presence of the boy who will carry the Tudor name farther than anyone could have predicted. Henry, a child with a claim so questionable that most nobles probably filed it mentally under miscellaneous. But a claim nonetheless, barely enough to wedge open the door of destiny. You step onto a narrow, muddy road, the kind that sticks to your boots like a clingy axe, and feel the world shifting into the late chapters of the Roses' feud. England is unsettled, uncertain. The throne feels less like a seat of power and more like a musical chair that never stops spinning. You walk toward a modest manor where the young Henry Tudor was raised after the death of his father, Edmund Tudor, born posthumously, meaning his father died before he arrived. Henry starts life already a little ghost-haunted. You feel that quiet loneliness lingering around the edges of the scene. as though even the shadows are whispering warnings. The boy's claim to the throne is, putting it kindly, fragile. It runs through his mother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, whose lineage ties back to the Beauforts, descendants of Edward III but originally born out of wedlock. Sure, the Beaufort line was later legitimized, but with a stern clause added by Parliament that said, more or less, okay, you're legitimate, but not that legitimate. Don't get any ideas about the crown. Which, of course, he absolutely would. As you walk into the manor's great hall, you hear the soft scratch of quills and the hushed tones of advisors who are already debating the boy's future. Margaret hovers nearby, young, devout, unyielding. Her faith is a fire that somehow manages to keep the drafty room warm. She believes Henry is destined for something vast, something shimmering just beyond the horizon. Her conviction wraps around the boy like a second cloak. You can almost see it, a thin golden thread in the air, vibrating with prophecy only she truly believes in. But despite Margaret's determination, most nobles glance at Henry's claim the way you glance at a coupon that expired last week, technically interesting but practically useless. You sense the boy absorbing this skepticism. He grows up with his title whispered, not proclaimed, like a secret someone isn't sure they should share. The irony, of course, is that this bastard claim will someday crown him. But for now, it's just a quiet ember. You move closer to the hearth where Henry sits, small and sharp-eyed. His face is thinner than portraits usually admit. His features watchful. He's listening, always listening. To tutors, to priests, to passing gossip. He's a boy raised not with the luxuries of a prince, but with the shadows of possibility. And those shadows cling to him like the smell of smoke on wool. A well-known fact of his youth, Henry spent long stretches under the guardianship of politically slippery nobles, men who saw him not as a future king, but as a bargaining chip. The most infamous of these was William Herbert, a Yorkist loyalist who took Henry into his household after Margaret was forced to hand him over. You can feel Henry's discomfort in those halls. A Lancastrian air raised among Yorkists is like a cat hiding in a room full of rocking chairs. It's here, in these uncertain years, that you stumble upon a strange detail few people know. Herbert's household kept a pet monkey that was notorious for stealing ink pots. You picture the young Henry studying diligently, only to have his notes smeared by a mischievous tuft of fur darting across the table. It's a ridiculous image, but history is full of those quiet absurdities no one writes on banners. A future king sharing study space with an ink-thieving monkey is one of those tiny human truths that makes the whole thing feel suddenly real. You step through one of the corridors now, where cold stone sweats faintly in the shadows. The air hums with tension, because even here, even as a boy, Henry is being watched. His claim is too weak to lift him, yet too dangerous to ignore. You sense that strange balancing act, how he must behave, how he must not offend, how he must survive by being just visible enough but never bright enough to spark suspicion. Some historians still debate how seriously Margaret believed her son's destiny from the start. Was she convinced by lineage, by faith, or by sheer stubborn will that could have powered a small mill if converted into electricity? But you stand here, sensing her fierce presence echoing from afar, and you suspect she believed it long before anyone else dared. You follow Henry out to a courtyard where the wind nips at your hair. The boy looks up, watching ravens circle the battlements, ominous little creatures that probably terrified the superstitious. But Henry's gaze is steady, thoughtful. He's the kind of child who measures silence, who listens to what isn't said. You feel his mind ticking like a clock that's always half a second ahead. He's learning early that legitimacy isn't a birthright, it's a performance. A story. And if there's one thing Wales taught his family, it's that stories can be sharpened into weapons. You trail the boy as he slips back inside, passing tapestries of the Yorkist sunburst symbol. They glare down at him in woven gold. That emblem must have felt like a constant reminder that he lived under the banner of those who defeated his kin. Every step he takes here is cautious. Every gesture measured. You can practically hear the soft scrape of unease beneath his movements. And yet, there's something else growing inside him, something slow, patient, stubborn as Welsh bedrock, the sense that his thin thread of a claim is real enough. If he pulls it hard enough. The hall grows dimmer as you follow him toward a narrow window. Through it, the countryside stretches out, green and wide, as though waiting for him. You imagine him standing here on a chilly morning, breath misting in the air, fingers pressed to the cold stone, wondering what kind of life a bastard claim heir could possibly carve out. The truth is, the world has no plan for him yet. No throne, no coronation, no destiny etched in gold leaf. Just a fragile lineage, a determined mother, a household full of enemies, and, occasionally, an ink-stealing monkey. But you feel it. The thread in your hand is tightening, drawing you onward. The roses may have wilted, and the Welsh hills may have whispered their blessings. But now you're stepping into the formation of something else. A claim almost too thin to see, yet strong enough to change everything. The boy doesn't know it yet, but you do. And soon, the world will too. You feel the air tighten again, as if history itself is drawing a long, uneasy breath. The halls where young Henry learned to keep his head down fade behind you. And the world tilts toward something harsher, exile. Not the romantic, self-discovery kind you see in movies where someone writes poetry on a cliff. No, this is the medieval version, which is colder, hungrier, and involves far fewer inspirational sunsets. You follow Henry as the walls of England fall away behind him. He's older now, though still far too young to be tangled in the mess of royal politics. But the crown's paranoia has sharpened, especially after Yorkist victories, and Henry's thin, awkward claim, too flimsy to hold, too dangerous to ignore, has painted a target on his back. You sense that target glowing faintly between his shoulder blades as he's hurried across the channel to Brittany, where foreign winds tug sharply at his cloak. The moment your feet touch Breton soil, you feel the difference. The air here carries the scent of salt and damp wood, tinged with something restless, like a tavern that never fully closes. Henry's exile isn't glamorous. It's improvised, unstable, and full of promises made in hallways, over maps, or behind doors just barely cracked. Brittany is not a sanctuary. It's a waiting room where the chairs wobble. You step into the grim stone halls of the Château de Suchinio, the place where Henry and his uncle, Jasper Tudor, spend much of their exile. The walls sweat cold at night, and every corridor whispers in French, Breton, and the occasional suspicious silence. Henry isn't a guest so much as a diplomatic chess piece being rotated by Duke Francis II of Brittany, who treats him both as an asset and a potential bargaining token. You can feel Henry's restlessness sharpening inside him like a splinter. He's trapped in a political limbo, important enough to keep alive, not important enough to free. You watch him pacing a dim room, the floor creaking softly beneath his boots. He examines cracks in the stone as if searching for answers there. His claim to the English throne seems laughably distant now, less a destiny and more a rumor. A well-known fact of this period, the English crown, under Richard III, repeatedly pressured Brittany to hand Henry over. Not for tea and polite conversation. Of course, Richard wanted him removed as a threat. Permanently, you sense the danger hovering like a storm cloud just outside the windows. But here's the strange part. The detail most people never hear, during one of these tense negotiation periods. Breton officials actually moved Henry between hiding spots disguised as a member of their own household staff. Picture this: future King Henry VII, wearing plain servant's clothes, carrying baskets or papers, slipping through the castle like an unnoticed shadow. It's an image that sticks with you, absurd and poignant all at once. Historians still debate whether Henry knew just how close he came to being handed over during these episodes. Some insist he was fully aware. Others argue that Jasper shielded him from the darkest possibilities. But standing here in the echo of this cold hall, you can almost feel Henry's instincts bristling. Whether or not he knew the details, he certainly sensed the danger. You follow him down to the stables, where the smell of damp hay and horse sweat thickens in the air. The stable hands barely glance at him. He's just another quiet figure drifting through exile. He runs a hand along a horse's neck, the gesture heavy with longing. Not for home. England feels impossibly distant, but for movement. For freedom, for something other than this suspended existence. You walk beside him as he slips out into the castle's narrow courtyard. Mud clings to your boots again. It seems exile is always muddy, while the wind sharpens its edges against your skin. Henry glances at the sea in the distance, the water dark as iron. You suspect he's mapping possibilities in his mind, friends in France, enemies in England, uncertain loyalties everywhere in between. His thoughts must feel like a chessboard played in dim light, with pieces carved from fog. There's a joking whisper somewhere near the kitchens that Henry has become an expert in patience. One of the cooks swears he can stand still for 2 hours without blinking when he's deep in thought. Another insists Henry once fell asleep standing up, which might just be exile fatigue, or maybe the earliest Tudor attempt at meditation. Either way, it's one of those small absurdities that makes you smile as you follow him through another dim corridor. But beneath those tiny, human moments, the political tension swells. England reaches out with a bribe here, a threat there. Brittany hesitates, calculating. Henry waits. It's a waiting that gnaws, not a pause, but an active ache. He spends his days reading, practicing diplomacy, sharpening his sense of strategy. Exile becomes his education, and Brittany becomes a strange kind of mentor, tough, unpredictable, unromantic. You move with Henry into a small chapel in the castle, where candles flicker low. The air smells of wax and cold stone. Henry kneels, hands clasped, eyes fixed on some point between faith and desperation. You sense the tension in his shoulders, the unspoken prayer threaded into his breath. He is a man in the making, but not yet a man who believes he will ever rule anything. Tonight, he is only someone trying not to disappear. A guard's footsteps echo outside, steady, heavy, and slightly bored. Another reminder that Henry is being kept safe and imprisoned at the same time. He stands slowly, brushes dust from his tunic, and leaves the chapel. You follow, feeling the building pressure like a pot about to boil over. Then something shifts. France enters the scene with interest, subtly nudging Brittany to keep Henry alive and unreachable by England. Suddenly, Henry isn't just a burden, he's leverage. The political winds swirl so sharply you could almost see them carving patterns in the mist. The future hums again, faint but insistent. Henry senses it. His restlessness turns into something sharper, resolve. He starts meeting quietly with exiled English nobles, discussing possibilities no one had dared voice aloud. Not yet a plan, just the idea of one. You feel the spark forming. As the chapter of exile stretches on, Henry becomes less a frightened heir and more a patient strategist. Exile, in its harsh way, has carved him into someone capable of waiting, calculating, enduring. And though he doesn't know it yet, this restless waiting will soon push him toward a crossing far more dangerous than the channel he fled across. A crossing he will not make alone. You feel Brittany's damp corridors dissolve behind you as the wind shifts, colder now, edged with something sour. It's the smell of a kingdom fraying at the seams. A place where every whispered rumor feels heavier than law. You step back across the channel. Though not physically, more like drifting through the invisible thread of consequence. The moment your feet touch English soil again, you sense Richard III's shadow long before the man himself appears. The air vibrates with tension, as if the land is holding its breath, unsure whether to swallow or scream. England, at this moment, is not a steady kingdom. It's a cracked mirror reflecting conflicting fears. You walk through London's narrow streets, feeling the unease pooling like rainwater between cobblestones. People speak in lower voices. Market vendors glance over their shoulders. Even the tavern drunks, normally quite enthusiastic conversationalists, seem subdued, as though afraid their ale might be listening. It's the kind of atmosphere where you wouldn't be surprised if a loaf of bread started spreading gossip. Richard III sits on the throne, but the throne itself feels uncertain. His reign began in a storm of legal claims, accusations, and the sudden disappearance of his nephews, the young princes in the Tower. That event, famous and endlessly picked apart, hangs over everything like a thick, gray fog. You pass the tower's looming stone walls, and a chill slides down your spine. It's not just the cold. It's the silence, too complete, too practiced. The kind of silence that suggests people have agreed not to talk about something because talking makes it real. Historians still debate whether Richard ordered the princes' deaths, whether someone else acted independently, or whether the boy's fate is wrapped in a tangle even darker than the records admit. But tonight, you're standing in the shadow of uncertainty, and it presses against your chest like a hand. You walk deeper into the city. And London feels unsettled, not violently, but nervously. It's the kind of tension that builds in your shoulders. The kind you don't notice until you try to relax and realize your neck has turned into a medieval catapult. Richard's reforms, legal, economic, administrative, should have calmed things. Many of them were surprisingly fair, even modern in spirit, but fear works faster than policy. And England is afraid. Farther north, you feel the kingdom's fracture lines widening. Rumors about the princes clash with whispers of discontent among nobles who resent Richard's rapid consolidation of power. You walk through a manor's drafty great hall in Yorkshire, eavesdropping on a group of lords speaking over a map. Their voices are tense, sharp-edged. They don't trust Richard. They don't trust each other. Honestly, they don't even trust the map. One of them mutters something about divine right, another about lineage, and a third just wants more wine. It's clear they're not plotting anything coherent yet, just circling the idea of rebellion like nervous birds. But that circling matters. It's the kind of slow, uneasy gathering that sets the stage for storms. You slip out into the countryside where peasants work the fields with a dull, resigned rhythm. The earth beneath your feet feels tired. England is weary of switching allegiances every few years. York, Lancaster, York again. It's like being forced to root for rival football teams based on whoever shows up at your door with a bigger sword. The common people aren't whispering about the princes. They're whispering about taxes, bad harvests, and which noble to avoid offending this week. Turmoil isn't abstract for them, it's in their daily bread. A strange detail strikes you as you pass a small village, in this region. It's common for people to hang carved wooden charms shaped like tiny mice above doorways. They're meant to protect grain stores from misfortune. Not actual mice, just metaphorical. Wooden ones. It's one of those little superstitions that says everything about the era. Danger is everywhere. So even the decorative rodents are on duty. You keep moving, following the thread of unrest as it weaves through castles, villages, and whispered conversations. Everywhere you go, you feel the kingdom's pulse stuttering. Richard is trying, truly trying, to tighten order. But suspicion clings to him like a stain he can't scrub clean. You find yourself at a small gathering in a candlelit chamber, half noble, half merchant, where a few daring souls discuss Henry Tudor. Quietly, carefully. The tone is less enthusiastic rebellion and more, well, we need someone. Henry's claim, once dismissed as flimsy, suddenly looks appealing simply because it isn't Richard's. That's how unstable England is. The bar for support is now, not the current guy. The conversation turns to alliances, France, Brittany, discontented nobles, distant relatives with faint claims. It's like watching people try to assemble a puzzle using pieces from 4 different boxes. But something is shifting, slowly, imperceptibly. In the unease, you feel a vacuum forming. And history hates a vacuum. It begs to be filled. You step outside into the cool night. The moon hangs above the rooftops like a pale witness. A horse snorts in a nearby stable. Restless, you hear the faint creak of a tavern sign swaying in the wind. Its dull thud punctuating the street's anxious quiet. Then a different sound rises, a murmur spreading through the kingdom like a ripple. Small rebellions flare, conspiracies thicken, Some nobles test Richard's strength with subtle defiance. Others hedge their bets, keeping one foot in loyalty and the other in treason. You notice the indecision in their movements, the hesitation in their voices. This isn't a storm yet, but the clouds are gathering. And through it all, Henry's name keeps returning, spoken in hallways, whispered over letters, mentioned in church pews by people who pretend to be praying. He's still in exile, still powerless, still a theoretical heir, but England is beginning to imagine him. And imagination is more dangerous than armies. You close your eyes for a moment and feel the tension humming through the land. Richard's England is a place of unanswered questions, unsteady loyalties, and quiet dread, a place where power seems to rest on a surface as thin as frost, and you sense cracks forming beneath. You open your eyes again and step forward. The turmoil is rising, the thread is tightening, and somewhere across the sea, in a cold Breton castle, Henry Tudor feels a tremor in the air, though he doesn't yet know it's England calling him back. The stage isn't set, not yet, but it's being built piece by piece in whispers and fear, waiting for the man who will dare to place his foot upon it. You feel the tremor of England's unrest still buzzing beneath your feet as the world tilts back toward the thin thread connecting Henry to his uncertain future. But now that thread stretches through corridors where light rarely reaches, places where whispers matter more than armies, where promises float half-formed, and where every ally is also a potential betrayer. You're stepping into a realm shaped not by banners or battlefields, but by candlelit secrets and the hesitant courage of desperate men. The air shifts as you follow the story out of England's turmoil and back across the Channel, into Brittany's chill once more. Henry is still in exile, still pacing stone floors, still wearing patience like a threadbare cloak. But something has changed. The whispers from England have found him. They seep through the damp walls like winter drafts. His name is being spoken again, not as an afterthought, not as a bargaining pawn, but as a possibility. You walk beside Henry down a corridor lit by torches that spit and crackle, casting restless shadows. Duke Francis II's court feels different now, full of murmured conversations that pause when someone enters a room. England is stirring, and Brittany can smell opportunity the way sailors smell incoming storms. You stop at a narrow wooden door. Behind it, a small group of English exiles has gathered, nobles who fled Richard III's tightening grip. Men who lost land, favor, or simply the will to pretend loyalty. When Henry enters, their faces lift, not with joy, but with that precarious spark people get when they realize their last option might also be their only one. These meetings, obscured by time, are where the earliest alliances form. Not strong ones, not yet. But alliances in the shadows always begin with uncertainty. The men speak in low voices, their plans shaped more by hope than evidence. A few are experienced warriors. Others are glorified bureaucrats who never expected to be discussing rebellion over cold wine and unsteady candlelight. Henry listens more than he speaks. His exile has carved this habit into him. He weighs their words like a merchant testing coins for authenticity. They discuss raising troops, rallying discontented nobles, securing money from France. They speak of Richard's growing in popularity, the rumors about the princes, the shifting loyalties among northern lords. But beneath their cautious optimism, there's fear. Real, bone-deep fear. Because betting on Henry is risky. And they all know it. You lean against the wall, letting the tension settle in your senses. The room smells of damp wool, wax, and something else, uncertainty. With a faint undertone of stale bread. One man, slightly drunk, keeps whispering that this alliance could change the destiny of England. Another keeps coughing nervously, which adds absolutely nothing helpful to the atmosphere. A detail many people don't know emerges in this moment. These exiled conspirators used a simple, almost absurd system to verify trust. They exchanged small tokens, rings, carved pieces of bone, even scraps of embroidered cloth, that symbolized mutual support. It sounds like something from a summer camp friendship ritual. But in the shadows of medieval politics, a token could mean the difference between gaining an ally and being handed straight to Richard III. You watch Henry take one of these tokens, a small wooden medallion carved with a Tudor rose. It's crude, uneven, not at all the elegant emblem it will later become. But Henry closes his fingers around it as though holding something alive. And in a way, he is the first fragile heartbeat of a rebellion. Yet these alliances are unstable, shifting like mist. Some nobles promise support but offer nothing concrete. Others hesitate, afraid to move against Richard too soon. You sense this hesitation filling the room, binding the conspirators like a net they wove themselves. It makes the shadows feel thicker, and it sharpens Henry's restlessness once more. Later that night, you follow Henry and Jasper as they meet with Breton officials in a different corridor, one colder, narrower, and with an unsettling draft that might indicate a poorly maintained window or an ominous metaphor. Brittany is playing its own game. Duke Francis wants leverage against England, and Henry is perfect leverage. You can feel the tug of war between diplomacy and self-preservation in the air. The Breton advisors speak softly, carefully. They promise protection. They promise secrecy. They promise support, but always with qualifiers. They want assurances. They want political advantage. They want to keep Henry close but never too free. He is an asset, not a leader. Not yet. Some historians still debate whether Brittany ever genuinely intended to help Henry reclaim the English throne, or whether they simply wanted to keep him alive long enough to sell him to whichever side offered the better deal. You stand in the dim glow of torchlight and feel the truth leaning toward both possibilities at once. You step outside into the courtyard. The night is thick with fog, wrapping the castle in a gray shroud. Henry breathes it in deeply, as though testing the air for signs of destiny. He's not naive, not anymore. He knows these alliances are delicate things, like early snowflakes that melt the moment someone breathes too hard. But he also knows he needs them. He cannot reclaim anything alone. You follow him to the stables where a mare tosses its head. Sensing the tension in her human companion, Henry strokes her neck absently. He's thinking, strategizing. The alliances forming around him aren't enough yet. Brittany's support wavers. France's intentions are murky. The English exiles lack numbers. But the thread is pulling tighter. A stable hand approaches Henry timidly, offering a cup of something warm. The drink smells like spiced wine and damp wool, a combination somehow fitting for this moment of fragile alliances. The stable hand mentions a rumor that a major English noble, Lord Stanley might be open to supporting Henry. Henry's expression tightens. Stanley, the ultimate pragmatist, is famous for switching sides so often he might as well have had his own personal revolving door. Henry doesn't trust him. No one does. But he also knows alliances in the shadows often depend on men like Stanley, those who wait until the last moment, sniff the wind, and jump toward whichever side looks slightly safer. The thought lingers as you and Henry walk back inside. The castle feels different now, like a stage being set in the dark. The conspirators whisper, the Breton advisors calculate, the French envoys circle like cautious hawks. And through it all, Henry stands at the center, quiet but steady, aware that every breath he takes is part of a growing storm. You sense the alliances knitting themselves slowly into place. Imperfect, fragile, but real enough to matter. And somewhere deep inside Henry's growing resolve, you feel a shift. A quiet acceptance that the path ahead won't stay in the shadows much longer. The time for hiding is dissolving. The thread is pulling him toward something he cannot yet see. But you can. And soon, he will too. You feel the fog of Brittany curling tighter around you as the night deepens. And for a moment, everything seems suspended in that dim, wavering half-light, the alliances, the conspiracies, the cautious promises exchanged under dripping stone arches. But the thread you've been following since those Welsh hills begins to tug harder now. Insistent, pulling you toward a shoreline where destiny waits for no one. Henry feels it too. You can sense it in the air around him, a quiet urgency. Sharper than any whisper the exiles have shared so far. Tonight, the shadows no longer feel like places to hide. They feel like places that push. You find Henry standing near the narrow slit windows of the Breton castle, staring out toward where the sea lies hidden in darkness. He looks thinner from the sleepless weeks, but also more defined, as though exile itself has carved his resolve into something firmer. The wooden token he received from one of his earliest allies sits in his palm, turning slowly between his fingers. It's worn now, smoothed by worry and hope, almost like a rosary bead made for politics rather than prayer. News has arrived, small, fragile, but electrifying. England's unrest is boiling higher. More nobles are sending secret messages to Henry, urging him to act. Brittany, sensing an opportunity slipping toward France, signals that they may, perhaps, possibly, support Henry's departure. Though never in clear terms. It's the kind of permission that feels like being handed a key with the warning, but don't actually open anything. Henry understands the implication. If he wants to reclaim his claim, not decades from now. Not in theory, but in truth, he cannot wait any longer. You follow him as he moves through the castle's dim corridors. Jasper at his side, Jasper, ever the guardian, walks with the weighted steps of someone who has spent half his life bracing for disaster. The torches sputter as they pass, casting restless shapes on the walls. It's as though the entire castle knows what's about to happen and isn't sure whether to encourage them or call for reinforcements. Outside, the night air slaps your cheeks with a cold sharpness that feels almost invigorating. The sky above is low, heavy with clouds that look like bruises. Wind lashes across the courtyard, pulling at cloaks and hair, making even the horses in the stables stomp nervously. This is not a peaceful night for travel. It's the kind of night when sensible people stay indoors and pray the roof doesn't leak. But Henry isn't aiming for sensible. His followers, what few he has, gather near the stables with a quiet urgency. They're a strange mix: hardened Welsh fighters, exiled English nobles wearing exhaustion like armor, Breton men trying not to look directly involved, and at least one man who has clearly mistaken tonight for a fishing trip based on the gear he's carrying. You watch them adjust their cloaks, tighten their saddles, sharpen their daggers. Every movement vibrates with the knowledge that this is it. There's no turning back. You catch snippets of whispered conversations. Is the tide with us? As with us as it ever is. So, not with us. Correct. Someone jokes nervously about seasickness, earning a groan from half the group. Humor feels like a fragile lantern in this darkness, flickering but desperately needed. A strange little detail surfaces from the corner of your senses. One of the men carries a charm shaped like a small wooden fish. Painted red, it's said to bring good luck on dangerous crossings. Whether it actually works or not, you can't say, but you're glad someone has brought something resembling optimism. The horses snort and paw the muddy earth as the group begins moving toward the docks. You walk beside Henry, feeling the tension coiled beneath his stride. He's not afraid, not exactly. He's bracing, preparing himself for what the crossing means. Exile has been his cocoon, uncomfortable but protective. To leave Brittany is to shed the last of childhood's safety and step fully into the churning, unpredictable mouth of history. When the docks appear through the mist, they look almost unreal, just ghost shapes of masts and hulls, swaying gently like sleepers disturbed by dreams. The smell of brine mingles with rotting wood and seaweed, and the wind whistles through the rigging in a tone that sounds suspiciously like a warning. The ship waiting for them is small, distressingly small. Especially for the weather. Its hull creaks loudly enough to make even the bravest men reconsider whether they've made wise life choices. You step onto the slick wooden planks, feeling the boat sway under your weight. It's not a reassuring sensation. Henry boards last. He pauses at the gangplank, glancing back at Brittany with a long, unreadable look. Not a farewell exactly, more like an acknowledgement. This place sheltered him, used him, protected him, threatened him, and now it releases him. A wet gust slams against the sails as the boat pushes off. You grip the railing, feeling the sea claw at the hull. Henry braces himself beside you, cloak whipping violently in the wind. His expression is set, determined, but you sense the flicker of doubt flicking through his thoughts. Not fear of the sea, though the sea is absolutely worth fearing right now, but fear of whether his alliances, so fragile and half-formed, will survive contact with reality. The channel is narrow, yes, but tonight it feels like crossing a living thing. Waves rise, dark and cold, smacking the boat hard enough to rattle your bones. Spray stings your face. The deck tilts dangerously. Someone curses. Someone else prays. Jasper shouts orders over the howling wind, his voice barely audible. The boat lunges upward, then crashes down again, wood groaning under the strain. You grip the railing tighter. Henry grips it too, knuckles white. This is the crossing that history always glosses over, reducing it to a neat, heroic line. Henry sailed for England, but you feel every shudder of the hull, every slap of cold water. This is not heroic. This is survival. A rogue wave slams across the deck, knocking one man off his feet. Henry reaches instinctively, pulling him upright. The man laughs shakily, sputtering out seawater. "If we die here," he says, "Richard will be furious he didn't get to do it himself." It's a joke, technically, but only technically. Through the storm, through the chaos, Henry keeps his gaze fixed forward, toward England, toward uncertainty, toward war. He stands on the heaving deck like someone holding his breath before plunging into deep water. Historians still debate whether this crossing was planned with careful strategy or whether it happened simply because the political moment demanded action before thought. But standing here, with the sea trying to swallow the boat whole, you suspect it was both. A push from England, a pull from destiny, and Henry caught in the narrow, treacherous space between. Hours feel like days. The storm finally softens, leaving the boat bobbing tiredly. The wind quiets. The horizon lightens with the faint gray of dawn. And there, like the first flicker of a long-awaited dream, England rises through the mist. The narrow crossing is over. The dangerous part is just beginning. The first gray ribbon of dawn unwraps itself across the horizon as the boat limps toward England's shore. And you feel the world steady under your feet again, or at least pretend to. The crossing may be over, but the tremor in Henry's breath tells you the true turbulence lies ahead. He steps onto the wet sand with the cautious silence of someone who knows the land beneath him is both a promise and a courtroom. You follow him, feeling the weight of the moment settle like fog on your shoulders. The shore is quiet, almost eerily so. No crowds, no welcoming lords with banners. Just wind combing through the tall grass and waves whispering against the rocks. The sort of place where history doesn't announce itself. It just waits. The men unload supplies with jittery urgency. Cloaks drip seawater. Boots squelch in the sand. Jasper surveys the terrain, jaw tight, eyes sharp. Henry digs his heel into the soil, English soil, for the first time in years. His exile has ended. His campaign has begun. But this isn't some triumphant march with trumpets and polished armor. It's a slog, a gamble, a trek through a kingdom that is still measuring whether it wants him back at all. You feel that uncertainty like a shifting current as the group moves inland. Following narrow, muddy tracks through fields that smell of wet earth and hay. The march begins quietly, with only a handful of loyalists trudging along behind Henry. Their steps are heavy, not from exhaustion but from the weight of expectation. They know they're outnumbered, underfunded, and uncomfortably close to looking like an ambitious hiking club rather than an army. You press on with them, boots sinking into soft ground. The countryside rolls out around you. Gentle hills patched with farms, villages, and occasional manor houses that watch the road with shuttered windows. This land remembers war too well. You feel it in the quiet, like a held breath. Henry rides near the front now. Posture straight, gaze fixed ahead. Every few minutes he glances back at his men. Counting, recounting, worrying, even with new supporters trickling in, small groups of Welsh soldiers. A smattering of disaffected nobles. The numbers still look painfully thin. An army more paper cut than sword strike. News spreads as you travel. Sometimes ahead of you, sometimes behind. You overhear whispers in inns and farmyards. Henry Tudor has landed. With how many men? Not nearly enough. Doesn't matter. Richard won't like it. People stare as you pass. Some nod respectfully. Others look away, worried Richard's spies might see. You can almost taste the tension. Metallic and sharp, like biting your tongue. But here in the quiet hum of travel, a strange detail surfaces, something most accounts forget to mention. Some of Henry's soldiers carried small pieces of coal tied in cloth pouches around their necks. Welsh miners swore these charms kept travelers safe from misfortune. It feels oddly comforting, watching those little black bundles bounce with each step, as if even the deepest caverns of Wales have sent their blessings. You keep marching. Fields turn into forests. Forests give way to ridges where the wind cuts cold and insistent. Henry rests rarely, eats quickly, sleeps lightly. You watch him study maps by lamplight, tracing possible routes, probable allies, dangerous choke points. His fingers tremble slightly when he thinks no one is watching. You notice. You're close enough now to sense the exhaustion carving lines into him like an impatient sculptor. Yet something else is growing inside him too, confidence. Cautious but real. Each new supporter strengthens it. Each whispered pledge from a noble house stiffens his spine. The march is slow but steady. The momentum is fragile but building. Then the first real turning point arrives. You reach Wales. The land seems to recognize Henry, not with celebration, but with a stern kind of welcome. Rocky hills rise around you, thick with heather and mist. Sheep glance at your group with the same judgmental expressions their ancestors wore in Section 2. A cliffside wind whips your cloak sideways, reminding you that Wales is not a gentle host. But it is loyal. Word speeds through the valleys faster than the men can march. Descendants of old allies begin to join. Some bring horses, others bring weapons, a few bring nothing but themselves and the fury of old grudges. You feel the army's pulse strengthening, swelling with each new arrival. Henry's face changes when his Welsh supporters appear, softens, brightens, steadies. This is the land of his father's people, the land where the Tudor story began. And in these hills, the thread you've been following tightens brilliantly. But don't think this becomes easy. The march is still grueling. Supplies run thin. Rain drenches everyone with irritating consistency. At one point, a gust of wind sends Jasper's hat flying into a bog, prompting a few soldiers to laugh quietly. Because Jasper is terrifying when annoyed. Even Henry smiles, though only briefly. Still, the march continues. Through towns where people stand in doorways watching with unreadable expressions. Across bridges that creak ominously. Over hilltops where the view stretches wide enough to remind you how small this fleeing force really is. And then comes the most critical whisper. Lord Stanley. The name drifts through the camp like smoke, visible, dangerous. Impossible to pin down. Stanley, whose loyalties bend like reeds in the wind. Stanley, who commands thousands of men. Stanley, whose support could tip the scale or collapse it. Henry sends messages. Stanley replies with polite ambiguity. You feel the unease tighten in Henry's chest. Depending on Stanley is like depending on weather forecasts. Hopeful, but rarely accurate. Historians still debate exactly when Stanley decided what he'd do at Bosworth, or if he decided at all. Some say he plotted from the start. Others insist he simply waited to see who looked like the probable winner. Honestly, both options sound equally in character. The march draws closer to its final destination, Bosworth. The air grows heavier as you approach. The landscape seems aware of what's coming, the way animals sense storms before humans do. The wind quiets, the days feel shorter, the tension among the men coils tighter. You reach a ridge overlooking a broad, uneven plain, marshy in places, rutted by old paths, covered in late summer grass that bends gently under the breeze. This is no majestic battlefield. It's muddy, cramped, imperfect, but this is where the thread has been pulling you all along. Henry stands at the crest, the wind snapping his cloak behind him. You stand beside him, feeling the weight of the moment press into your skin. From here, the march ends. The battle begins. You stand on the ridge beside Henry as the plain of Bosworth stretches below you, washed in early morning mist that clings to the earth like a nervous secret. The grass moves in slow ripples beneath the breeze, and for a moment, everything looks deceptively calm, soft, almost tender, but you can feel the tension buzzing in the soil, humming under your boots like the low vibration before a thunderstorm cracks open the sky. Henry stares across the plain, studying every curve and shadow. You can sense the calculation behind his eyes, years of exile sharpening into this single point in time. The march is over. The waiting is done. What lies ahead now is not uncertainty, but inevitability. The armies begin to form on opposite sides of the field. Richard III's forces gather first, larger, better equipped, glittering with polished armor that catches the rising sun. Their banners snap crisply in the wind, the white boar, fierce and snarling. The sight is enough to make even the bravest man rethink his life choices. Henry's army, by comparison, gathers like a patchwork quilt, Welsh soldiers with weather-beaten shields, English exiles wearing mismatched armor, a handful of French mercenaries who look like they'd rather be anywhere else. They don't have the shine Richard's men do, but they have something else: resolve built from loss, exile, and desperation. You can feel it radiating off them like heat. Still, Henry knows he's outnumbered. You can sense the worry simmering beneath his calm expression. Every choice today must be near perfect. Every command must land exactly right. And somewhere out there, between the lines, lurks the great uncertainty of Lord Stanley, hovering with thousands of men, refusing to pick a side. Not yet. Historians still debate whether Stanley always intended to betray Richard or whether he made a split-second decision based solely on survival. Either way, he stands like a loaded question mark at the edge of the field. And you feel Henry glancing his way more than once, hoping for clarity that refuses to come. A drumbeat rises, slow, heavy, a sound like a heartbeat through war's ribs. The sun lifts higher, armor glints, horses shift uneasily, breath fogs the air. Even the birds seem unsure whether they should sing or flee. Richard sits astride a powerful horse, wearing a crown on his helmet, as if daring the world to try to take it off him. His gaze sweeps the field with a confidence so sharp it can cut. You feel the temperature drop slightly as his cavalry assembles on the right flank. Spears angled like a forest of cold steel. There's something terrifyingly beautiful in the precision of it. A strange detail surfaces, one you wouldn't expect on a morning like this. Some of Richard's knights carried tiny sprigs of lavender tucked into their gauntlets. A tradition meant to steady the nerves and ward off fear. So here they are, ferocious warriors with pockets that smell faintly of Grandma's bedside drawer. History has a sense of humor. The first cries split the air. Archers release. The hiss of arrows slices the quiet apart. Henry's men raise shields, some too slowly. You hear the metallic thuds, the muffled screams, the crunch of impact. The battle begins not with a roar, but with a shiver. You stay close to Henry as he moves along the line, his horse stepping carefully through churned mud. He calls encouragement, steady and clear, his voice surprising even himself with its strength. The men respond, gripping their weapons tighter. Fear becomes motion. The armies clash. Steel meets steel in a chaotic symphony, harsh, violent, relentless. The ground trembles with the weight of hundreds of men pushing, striking, stumbling, shouting. Mud splashes. Horses scream. You feel the air thicken with sweat, smoke, and the sharp tang of iron. Henry stays back at first, strategically. Not fearfully. He trusts his commanders. He trusts the terrain. And he trusts the simple truth that if he dies too early, everything dies with him. His place is to choose the exact moment when caution becomes courage. Richard, on the other hand, is already scanning the field for Henry like a predator picking out prey. The battle swells, contracts, shifts. Henry's left flank pushes forward. His right falters. A surge of Richard's infantry almost breaks through, only to be repelled by a sudden, furious countercharge of Welsh soldiers whose battle cries slice through the chaos like jagged lightning. And then comes the pivot. Word spreads, fast, frantic, impossible to verify. Someone shouts that Stanley might be moving. Men glance toward the distant ridge. You squint hard, trying to catch the motion. Dust rises. Formations shift. But Stanley remains unreadable, still perched between betrayal and intervention. Henry looks toward the ridge too. A moment of raw uncertainty flashes across his face. The weight of Stanley's hesitation presses on him like a stone. But he cannot wait, not anymore. Richard sees this too. And that's when he makes his choice, the one the chronicles immortalize. Richard III lowers his lance, yanks the reins of his warhorse, and charges directly at Henry. No hesitation, no delegation, just raw, focused fury. You feel the shockwave run through the field. Richard's charge is not poetic. It's a thunderbolt, a violent streak of determination ripping across the battlefield with terrifying speed. His horse pounds the earth. His knights thunder behind him like an avalanche. Dust explodes beneath their hooves. Henry's eyes widen, not with fear, but with clarity. This is the moment. Jasper shouts. Bodyguards surge around Henry. Henry spurs his horse hard, moving to reposition, to survive the king's deadly sprint. The world becomes a blur of motion, shouting, steel, hooves, breath, mud. Richard's last charge feels like a force of nature. The king barrels forward, desperate to end the rebellion with one decisive blow. His crown glints in the sun. His lance pierces the air. His roar echoes across the field, fierce, guttural. The sound of a man betting everything on a single strike. For a heartbeat, the whole battlefield pivots around this moment. Henry braces, eyes fixed, jaw set. His men tighten their formation. Shields raised, spears angled. They know that if Richard reaches Henry, it's over, not just the battle, but everything the march stood for. The horses collide, steel meets shields. Richard's knights crash into Henry's guard with devastating force. Men are thrown, horses stumble, sparks fly. You feel the impact in your bones. Henry is nearly unhorsed. His cloak tears. A knight swings at him. But Jasper intercepts the blow with a strength that feels almost inhuman. And through the storm of chaos, dust, blood, shouts, clangs, you sense something shifting. Richard's charge, for all its fury, begins to stall. Henry's line holds. Barely, desperately, but it holds. And somewhere on that distant ridge, Stanley finally moves. The tide is turning. But the charge isn't over yet. The king is still fighting. Still clawing toward Henry. Still refusing to yield. This is the last charge. And it's not finished. The world is still shaking from Richard's charge when you realize something subtle has shifted. Something beneath the noise. Beneath the chaos. Beneath even the thundering hooves and ringing steel. It's in the air, in the ground, in the way every man on the field tightens his grip without knowing why. The battle hasn't yet swung. Not fully, not decisively, but the thread of fate has begun to tug in a different direction. Richard's cavalry, once a fearsome spear thrust through Henry's line, is slowing, not stopping. Richard is far too dangerous to simply stop, but faltering. Losing the crisp momentum of that first terrifying sprint. You feel it in the rhythm of the battlefield. The thunder dulls. The shock softens. The strike that should have broken Henry is beginning to fracture instead. You see Richard himself only a few yards away now. Still driving forward. Still hacking through Henry's bodyguards with ferocious precision. His crown glitters atop his helmet. Battered and mud-sprayed but unmistakable. His face is set in a grimace, anger, resolve, desperation fused together. He is fighting like a man who knows this moment defines not only his reign, but his entire family's claim. Henry's horse rears as a blow glances past, and you feel the jolt ripple through your spine. He steadies himself, gripping the reins tightly. His guard closes around him again, forming a living wall of steel. Mud splashes in every direction. The scent of sweat, iron, and churned earth mixes into a heavy, suffocating fog. Then a distant noise, faint at first, threads through the air. Shouts, new ones, growing louder. You glance toward the ridge. Stanley is moving. After hours or years, depending on how long Henry feels he's been waiting, Stanley's army finally tilts forward like a great wave deciding which shore to break upon. Thousands of armored men descend the slope, their banners unfurling in a sudden rush of wind. The white hands of Stanley's emblem gleam faintly in the sun, raised as though blessing, or condemning, the chaos below. Richard sees this too. His head snaps toward the ridge. Even through the frenzy of battle, you feel his fury spike like lightning. This was not the plan. Stanley's neutrality was supposed to hold, or break in his favor. But now the tide has a direction, and it's not his. Some historians still debate whether Stanley intended this outcome all along, whether he orchestrated a masterful political balancing act or simply waited for the exact moment when choosing sides offered the highest odds of survival. You stand in the chaos, watching Stanley's men thunder closer, and realize either explanation fits far too well. Henry's men feel the shift immediately. You sense their fear thinning, replaced by something brighter, hotter, hope, a dangerous emotion on a battlefield, but a powerful one too. Richard's cavalry tries to brace, but their formation is buckling. His knights are too deep into the melee, too tangled among Henry's bodyguards to pivot, too locked into Richard's reckless gamble. And Richard refuses to pull back. He digs in harder, swinging his sword with brutal precision, determined to reach Henry even if the entire world collapses around him. His horse charges again, hooves churning mud, eyes wild. He cuts down another guard, then another. He advances by sheer will alone, forcing the battlefield to bend around him. It's terrifying and mesmerizing. You step aside as a soldier crashes to the ground near you. Shield splintered, breath rasping, Henry ducks beneath a wild swing, barely avoiding the blow. Jasper shouts, pushing forward with a surge of fury, trying to shield his nephew from the king's onslaught. Richard is close enough now that you can hear him, ragged breaths, furious growls, the scrape of metal against dented armor. He looks like a man who has set fire to every bridge behind him and decided the only way forward is through. But then the moment arrives, quiet, subtle, odd for something so monumental. Richard's horse missteps. A patch of soaked, treacherous mud, formed from churned earth and the morning's dew, pulls at the animal's hooves. The horse slips, stumbling sideways. Its momentum falters. Richard jerks violently, trying to steady it, but the uneven ground refuses to obey. Henry's men seize the opportunity. A shield slams upward. A spear thrusts forward. Richard reels, nearly thrown from the saddle. His crown tilts. His sword drops for a fraction of a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, the flood arrives. Stanley's men crash into the melee like a dam bursting. The impact reverberates through the battlefield. Richard's cavalry buckles, collapses, breaks. Shouts turn into screams. Horses panic. The line splinters. For the first time, Richard is not charging, he's surrounded. You see him swing wildly, refusing to yield. He fights with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, refusing every opening to surrender. Mud splashes across his armor. His crown, still affixed to his helmet, gleams briefly before being struck aside by a blow that sends both metal and monarch reeling. Richard falls. Not gracefully, not symbolically. He falls into mud, thick, cold, unceremonious, a crown tumbling beside him, rolling through wet earth until it settles like a discarded trinket. There is no majestic silence. There is noise, shouting, clashing, roaring, but around you, time stills. Henry sees it. His expression shifts, shock, disbelief, then something quieter, something like realization washing slowly over him, as if the world has expanded and contracted in the same breath. Jasper places a steadying hand on Henry's arm, but the young man barely notices. His gaze is fixed on the fallen figure in the mud. Richard III's final struggle ends here: trampled grass, churned soil, fading breath. The last Plantagenet king, fierce to the end, lies in the dirt while the crown he fought for rests just beyond his reach. It is over. Almost. A Stanley soldier retrieves the fallen crown, bent, muddied, dented, not a jewel-encrusted symbol of glory anymore. Just metal shaped into hope. He approaches Henry slowly, reverently. The men around you watch. Breath held, mud drying on their armor. The soldier kneels and offers the battered crown. Henry hesitates only a moment. Then he takes it, carefully, as though afraid it might break. The battlefield breathes out. For the first time today, your muscles loosen. The trembling in the earth fades. The sky seems to brighten. Here, in the mud of Bosworth, the Tudors rise. And the world shifts on its axis. The crown still feels heavy in Henry's hands, heavy not with jewels or gold, but with the weight of everything that has just unfolded in the mud behind him. You sense the tremble in his breath as he holds it, the shock still rippling through him like aftershocks from an earthquake. The battlefield is quieter now, as if even the wind is trying to understand what has just happened. Men who moments ago were locked in furious combat now stare at Henry with awe, exhaustion, and a dawning recognition that something irreversible has begun. But victory, you realize, isn't a full stop, it's a semicolon. The world doesn't end here, it pivots. And you pivot with it. Henry doesn't place the crown on his head. Not yet. He closes his fingers around it, mud and dents and all. And you see him swallow. The kind of swallow people make when responsibility suddenly becomes real enough to touch. Jasper leans close, murmuring something you can't hear. But Henry nods, steadying himself. There is no grand coronation on the field. No triumphant trumpets. Just this moment of breath, of mud, of realization. But the next steps, the political ones, loom ahead long before Henry can take a victory nap. You follow him back toward his camp, feeling the strange blend of triumph and disorientation swirling around the men. Some whisper prayers, others laugh in relief. One Welsh soldier is already trying to clean the mud off his boots with a handful of grass, muttering curses you don't recognize. The absurdity of it all nudges a smile onto your face. Even in the aftermath of a decisive battle, muddy boots remain a universal problem. As the hours pass, Henry begins issuing orders, firm, careful, deliberate. He moves like a man stitching the torn edges of a kingdom back together. Even though the fabric is still soaked and trembling, his messages ride out across England, announcing his victory, asserting his claim. But beneath those decisions lies a deeper truth: the war may be over. Yet legitimacy is a far more delicate battlefield. And this is where you feel the story pushing you forward, past the blood-soaked earth, toward something softer but no less strategic. A marriage. The idea isn't new. It has been whispering behind Henry's shoulder for years. Even through exile, joining the Red Rose of Lancaster with the White Rose of York wasn't just poetic, it was necessary. You feel the weight of that necessity as Henry discusses it with Jasper late into the night. The campfires flickering around them like nervous stars. Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV, sister of those lost princes whose shadows still cling to the tower. A Yorkist symbol, beloved by many, respected by more, a woman whose marriage could soothe wounds, silence factions, and stitch two warring houses into something resembling peace. But before Henry can even think the word wedding, he must secure the throne, secure Parliament's acknowledgement, secure England's fragile trust. You sense all of this buzzing through the camp like restless fireflies. Days pass. You follow Henry on the journey to London, riding through villages where people gather with hesitant curiosity. Some cheer, some bow, others simply stare, wondering if this young man, thin, pale, cautious, could truly be their king. The city receives him with a mix of relief and apprehension. Banners flutter, bells ring, but the cheers feel muted, as though London is holding a cautious breath. Henry notices. He always notices. In the halls of Westminster, he moves like a man navigating a field of invisible tripwires. Parliament confirms his claim by right of conquest, not lineage. A practical but sensitive choice. And Henry, with his careful blend of humility and steel, accepts. But the crown, still battered, still dented, sits beside him as a reminder that war is not erased just by winning. When Elizabeth is finally brought into London's political gravity, the atmosphere shifts again. You feel it the moment she enters a great hall where Henry waits. Light faces shadows. Red meets white. Hope stands across from caution. Elizabeth is tall, composed, with that serene Yorkist grace that painters always try to capture but never quite manage. Her presence is quiet but commanding, like a melody played on an instrument you didn't realize was in the room. Henry watches her with a mixture of curiosity, calculation, and something gentler he keeps tucked behind his stern exterior. Their first conversations are formal, careful, polished as river stones. Both know they are pieces on a chessboard larger than themselves, but they're pieces that will decide the endgame. Elizabeth speaks with courtesy. Henry replies with precision, but beneath the diplomacy, a strange harmony begins forming, soft as parchment, fragile as candle flame, but unmistakably real. London whispers about it endlessly. Some say Elizabeth carries herself like the queen she always expected to be. Others claim Henry looks at her with a kind of bewildered respect, as if he's finally met someone who understands the weight of legacy as intimately as he does. One quiet truth, rarely recorded but deeply felt as you stand nearby. The two share a kind of mutual watchfulness. She studies him as much as he studies her, not distrustfully, but thoughtfully, as though they're two people trying to understand the shape of peace. Historians still debate whether their marriage began with love, practicality, or sheer exhaustion from decades of conflict. You sense all three lingering in the air when they finally agree to unite their houses. But what you feel most strongly is relief, the kingdom exhaling, ready to be something other than a battlefield. Preparations begin. Banners embroidered with roses, red and white, flutter together for the first time in decades. The imagery is almost too symbolic, like a medieval marketing campaign that someone actually got right. But it works. People cling to the hope behind it. Even those who mistrust Henry soften at the thought of healing. You walk through Westminster Abbey on the day of the wedding, listening to the echo of boots on stone. The air smells of incense and candle smoke. Light spills through tall stained glass, turning the floor into a mosaic of shifting color. Henry stands at the altar, dressed not in extravagant splendor but in solemn dignity. Elizabeth walks toward him with a calm grace that quiets the entire assembly. The moment they clasp hands, the hush deepens, not dramatic, not shocked, but reverent. This, you realize, is the true coronation. Not the ceremony where a crown is placed on a head, but this joining, this symbolic mending of wounds too old and too deep for a single battle to erase. Elizabeth bows her head. Henry lifts his gaze. Their vows weave through the abbey like golden thread. Around you, people whisper blessings. Some cry. A few cynical nobles quietly calculate what this union means for their futures. Even the abbey's pigeons, perched high in the rafters, seem unusually respectful. And in the heart of it all, you sense something settling, something England has not felt in a long time. Balance. When the ceremony ends and the crowd erupts into cautious celebration, the roses, red and white, finally bloom together. The Tudors are not just rising anymore. They are rooting. And the kingdom is watching. The wedding's incense hasn't even faded from the stones of Westminster before you feel the subtle shift, the soft but undeniable tightening of responsibility around Henry's shoulders. The union of red and white roses may have soothed the kingdom's open wounds. But you can sense that beneath the surface, England is still watching him with a wary, slightly skeptical eye. Marrying Elizabeth gave him symbolism. Now he needs something far more tedious and far more dangerous. Legitimacy. You walk with Henry through the corridors of the royal palace in the days after the wedding. The halls echo with footsteps, some respectful, some resentful, many unsure. Courtiers bow, but their eyes linger too long, as if trying to determine whether this newly minted Tudor king is truly theirs or simply passing through. You feel their scrutiny prickling the air like static. Henry feels it too. You see it in the way he straightens his spine when he enters a room. The way his voice sharpens ever so slightly when giving orders. The way he pauses one heartbeat before signing anything, confirming he is not just wearing the crown, but wielding it. His first acts as king are carefully chosen, deliberate, calculated, not grand gestures meant to impress the masses, but steady strokes designed to stitch his rule into the legal, financial, and political fabric of the realm. Even the simplest decisions feel weighted, like a balancing act on a tightrope woven from expectations and suspicion. You watch as he restructures the royal finances because England, after decades of civil war, is running on fumes and wishful thinking. Henry pushes for tighter accounting, stricter record-keeping, and a treasury that counts every coin twice. Some courtiers whisper that the new king is too frugal, too watchful, but Henry remembers exile. He remembers scarcity. He knows what it is to run out of resources when enemies are hunting him. A strange detail emerges as you sit with him during one of these financial meetings. Henry has an odd habit of tapping his quill against the edge of the table exactly 3 times before signing any document. You can't tell whether it's superstition or simply nerves. But the rhythm becomes familiar, almost comforting in the monotony of ledgers and debts. Little rituals like that often go unnoticed by history. But here, in the quiet of these rooms, you feel how human they are. But money isn't enough to secure legitimacy. Henry also needs control. And that means the nobility. You follow him into the great council chamber, where lords sit in heavy chairs carved with symbols of ancient lineages. Their expressions range from cautious curiosity to thinly veiled discontent. These men once supported kings of York or Lancaster, or sometimes both. Depending on the season, Henry knows better than to trust them. Not yet. He introduces a system of bonds and recognizances, financial agreements that essentially say, "Stay loyal or this will hurt your wallet." Nobles sign them with stiff expressions. Some grumble, others smile too politely, but they all sign, because everyone remembers Bosworth. And everyone has heard that the new king is not a man easily pushed. Historians still debate whether Henry's use of bonds was a brilliant means of stabilizing the realm or a slightly tyrannical move dressed in bureaucracy. You stand among the ink bottles and parchment stacks and sense the answer leaning between the two. Henry learned in exile that trust is fragile, and loyalty must be earned or enforced, preferably both. Next, you watch him rework heraldry and symbols. The Tudor rose appears everywhere, woven into tapestries, carved into doors, embroidered onto clothing. The emblem becomes a quiet but persistent reminder that the two roses, red and white, are no longer at war. They bloom together now, because Henry has declared it so. You catch artisans muttering about the new design, arguing whether the petals should lean more red than white or vice versa. One of them swears the official pattern keeps changing based on Henry's mood. Another insists the king is simply indecisive about roses. You smile because amid all this seriousness, even royal branding comes with workplace gossip. But Henry's biggest challenge, far bigger than finances or symbols, is loyalty. Not the performative kind nobles display at ceremonies. Real loyalty. And that means correcting the narrative of how he came to the throne. You follow him into a chamber filled with scribes, where Henry dictates carefully crafted proclamations about his lineage. The Beaufort legitimacy is emphasized. His mother's noble bloodline is praised. His right to rule is framed not as an opportunistic grab, but as destiny shaped by lineage and divine favor. He orders Parliament to date his reign from the day before Bosworth, making Richard's supporters technically traitors for fighting against him. A shrewd move, a controversial one, but undeniably effective. Henry understands something few kings grasp so early. Kingship is as much memory as it is action. Control how the story is told, and you control how the kingdom sees you. And speaking of stories, you walk with him into a chamber where the royal wardrobe keeps records of new commissions. Henry orders clothing not dripping in jewels but cut with precision. Dark velvet, deep crimson, thick brocade, not ostentatious, but commanding. Clothes that say, "I am king," without needing to shout it. Elizabeth, in contrast, opts for elegance. Silks in pale gold, embroidery with Tudor roses worked into the hems. The two appear in court together often, projecting unity so powerfully that even skeptics begin to believe it, or at least pretend to. One small but delightful detail surfaces as you watch their court grow. Henry insists on keeping strict seating arrangements during feasts, ensuring Yorkist and Lancastrian families intermingle, political icebreakers forced by table assignments. It's equal parts strategic genius and medieval social engineering. You sit through several of these feasts, listening to nobles attempt small talk with historical enemies. So, lovely weather we're having. Yes, quite. Your house burned last year. Didn't it? Yes. Progress is slow, but progress. Henry also invests in justices of the peace, local officials tasked with keeping order in shires and towns. They handle everything from land disputes to minor assaults to arguments about whose sheep wandered into whose garden. The reforms make the king's justice feel present throughout England, not just in London. In quieter moments, you find Henry at a desk late into the night, candles burning low, muttering calculations under his breath. He writes letters to foreign courts, forging alliances with Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, Scotland. Each letter is a careful step toward solidifying his position in a world where kings can rise or fall based on a single signature. But legitimacy isn't just about paperwork or heraldry or alliances. It's about presence. So Henry travels, progresses through towns and cities, letting people see him, hear him, judge him. Children wave flags, merchants bow, farmers stand in muddy boots, trying to read their new king's character. Henry greets them with a restrained but steady warmth. He is not a charismatic performer, but he is real, and that matters more. You notice something else too. Henry always pays his in-bills. Immediately, without argument. It sounds trivial, but after years of nobles forgetting payments, this tiny detail quietly strengthens his reputation. One baker in Bristol is so thrilled to receive proper coin from the royal entourage that he hangs the king's receipt in his shop for decades. And the more the people see Henry, the calmness, the precision, the determined quiet, the more they accept him. Slowly, cautiously, but genuinely. By the end of this stretch of early reign, you feel something settle around the Tudors. Not certainty, England never moves that quickly, but a foundation. The crown found its way into Henry's hands through mud. Now it roots itself through method, law, patience, and something almost like grace. The Tudors are no longer merely rising. They are establishing. And England, exhausted from chaos, begins, little by little, to believe in them. You sense the shift long before Henry does, like a cold draft slipping beneath a locked door. His careful work, his deliberate restraint, his meticulous weaving of legitimacy into every corner of England, none of it shields him from the truth that crowns, no matter how solid they look, cast long shadows, and in those shadows, things grow, whispers, doubts, pretenders, phantoms. The first rumor arrives quietly. A name murmured in a tavern, a boy claiming something impossible. But rumors, like sparks, require only a bit of dry wood to ignite. And England, barely recovering from decades of civil war, is nothing but dry wood. You stand beside Henry in the council chamber when the news arrives. An impostor has emerged in Ireland. Supported by nobles hungry for disruption. The pretender's name, Lambert Simnel. A child claiming to be Edward Plantagenet, Earl of Warwick, the real Warwick, who is currently sitting in Henry's custody in the Tower. Very much alive and very much not in Ireland claiming anything. Henry listens, expression perfectly still. The silence that follows feels thick, brittle, dangerous. Then he exhales, a slow breath. Measured, almost tired, because of course it begins like this. Of course the kingdom tests him with ghosts of York before his reign has found steady footing. He sends emissaries. He sends warnings. He even parades the real Earl of Warwick through London streets to prove the boy in Ireland is lying. People watch Warwick pass with blank expressions, quietly absorbing the message. But not entirely reassured, because the problem isn't logic. The problem is longing. Some people want to believe the pretender. You follow Henry's thoughts as he turns this over. The uncertainty, the frustration, the familiar ache of being doubted. His entire life has been shaped by questions of legitimacy, his lineage questioned, his claim debated. Now the ghosts of rival claims begin to claw at him again. Wearing the face of a child puppet mastered by ambitious hands, Simnel is crowned king in Dublin Cathedral. An imitation ceremony so earnest it almost becomes tragic. A fake crown, a fake court, a fake monarch perched atop a pile of fragile hopes. And yet Henry cannot ignore it. Pretenders may be made of smoke, but smoke can still blind a kingdom. A strange, lesser-known detail surfaces here. Some Irish supporters believed Simnel's supposed identity because he liked to fidget with his sleeves in a particular way. A nervous tic similar to Warwick's childhood habit. That's all it took. One gesture. One scrap of familiarity. People cling to any hint of certainty when their futures feel unsteady. Henry responds the only way he can. With strategy. You follow him through the war room, maps spread across the table. Markers shifting, advisors murmuring with controlled urgency. He prepares an army, not massive but precise. He refuses to underestimate the rebellion, even though he knows the pretender himself is merely a boy caught in a storm he cannot comprehend. As Henry marches out, tension coils through him like wire. Not fear, not anger, something steadier, sharper. The determination of a man tired of defending what he's already earned. The Battle of Stoke Field follows. Brutal, chaotic, often overshadowed by Bosworth, yet it marks the true end of the Wars of the Roses. You stand beside Henry as his forces clash with the rebels, a mix of German mercenaries, Irish fighters, and English dissidents who cling stubbornly to old loyalties. The fighting is fierce. Mud clings thick to boots. Smoke coils upward. The air tastes of ash and iron. Henry watches every movement on the field with an intensity that borders on surgical precision. And when victory comes, when the rebels shatter and fall, it comes with a relief so deep it nearly buckles him. But the moment that truly defines him happens afterward. Lambert Simnel is captured, a child, frightened, confused, a boy who never imagined the rebellion would reach this scale. Henry studies him with an unreadable expression, then orders something unexpected. Mercy. Not execution, not imprisonment, mercy. Lambert is sent to work in the royal kitchens. Later, he becomes a falconer. You picture him feeding birds in a quiet courtyard. A life shaped not by ambition but by the strange twists of history. The decision spreads through England like a soft exhale. Astonishment, approval, maybe, just maybe, this king is different. But England's shadows do not clear so easily. You feel the next disturbance even before it's spoken aloud. A tremor in the kingdom's breath. A new name whispers through taverns, through manors, through foreign courts. Perkin Warbeck. where Lambert Simnel was a simple impostor manipulated by opportunists. Warbeck is something far more dangerous, charismatic, educated, uncanny in appearance, fluent in languages, confident enough to play the role of royalty with disturbing ease. He claims to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the lost princes. The phantom at the heart of England's greatest mystery. Historians still debate Warbeck's origins. Was he a merchant's son? A trained infiltrator? A delusional opportunist? Or something more complex? You walk beside Henry as the rumors deepen and spread, and you feel the king's heartbeat change. Warbeck isn't just a nuisance. He's a shadow shaped like a dagger. Foreign courts welcome him, Burgundy embraces him, Scotland funds him, France entertains him. His charm is as dangerous as his claim. Unlike Simnel, Warbeck learns how to adapt, mimicking royal poise, copying the Plantagenet mannerisms, telling stories with unsettling confidence. And people believe him. You can almost hear the cracks forming under Henry's careful foundation, not breaking it, but testing its resilience. Warbeck's threat isn't about numbers. It's about narrative, a story that refuses to die. Henry responds not with fear but with a tightening of the net. Trusted spies are dispatched, letters intercepted, diplomats sent to foreign courts with messages equal parts warning and persuasion. For all his caution, Henry knows how to act with quiet ruthlessness when necessary. One little known detail surfaces here. Henry had a special cipher created solely for communications concerning Warbeck. A code so complex that even some of his own advisors complained about headaches deciphering it. You smile, imagining a tired clerk muttering curses at a page full of unreadable symbols while the fate of the kingdom hangs in the balance. Years pass. Warbeck invades once, fails, flees, invades again, fails again. Like a phantom refusing to dissipate. Each attempt chips away at Henry's patience, though he hides his frustration behind the same calm expression he perfected in exile. Eventually, Warbeck is captured, brought before Henry not as a prince or rival, but as a man stripped of illusion. You watch Henry study him the way a scholar examines a dangerous book. Curiosity flickers behind his eyes, but caution burns brighter. Henry grants him calculated mercy at first, a chance to confess, a chance to surrender the phantom identity. But Warbeck tries to escape, tries to stir another uprising, tries to be the shadow that refuses light. And Henry ends it. Warbeck is executed, not with brutality, but with grim necessity, a closing of the curtain on a story that lingered too long. When the news spreads, the kingdom exhales again. You walk with Henry in the quiet after Warbeck's death. His face is tired, older, more lined by shadows than by age. Pretenders leave marks, even when defeated. They test not just power, but identity. But Henry's gaze lifts toward the horizon, steady, unwavering. The Tudors are not undone by phantoms. They outlast them, outthink them, outlive them. And England, weary of ghosts, begins to trust the man who refuses to be haunted. You feel the air soften as the threat of pretenders finally dissolves. Like fog lifting from a field after a long, sleepless night, Henry has outlasted phantoms, crushed rebellions, silenced whispers, and now, with the kingdom finally beginning to trust the Tudor rose, You sense the story turning inward, toward something quieter, more intimate, more vulnerable. A child. Not the child of a false claim or a foreign plot, but the child who will carry everything Henry has fought for. The child who will inherit not just a throne, but the fragile hope of a kingdom that has forgotten what stability feels like. You follow Henry to the royal nursery, where the air smells of warm linen, soft wood polish, and the faint sweetness of lavender sachets tucked into corners to keep the spirits calm, a superstition the nurses insist on. A cradle stands near the window, sunlight brushing gently across carved oak. Inside lies the future, young Prince Henry. Not the famous Henry yet. Not the dramatic king of 6 wives. Not the towering figure who will pull England toward rupture. Just a boy, quiet, watchful, a little bundle of rose-scented destiny. You watch King Henry VII approach the cradle with a hesitation that surprises you. He has commanded armies, navigated conspiracies, survived assassination plots, but fatherhood, somehow, makes him pause. He reaches down, brushing a finger lightly across his son's cheek, expression softening in a way he rarely allows in council chambers. Elizabeth of York stands beside him, serene as always. Her presence wraps the room in a gentle calm, warm, steady, grounding. She speaks softly about the boy's habits, how he likes to grip her sleeve, how he kicks his blanket off at night, how he responds to music with surprising attentiveness. These little details matter. In a dynasty built from mud, blood, and patched together legitimacy, normalcy becomes a luxury. You notice the subtle way Henry watches Elizabeth, part admiration, part gratitude, part something deeper. Their marriage, once purely strategic, has grown roots. You see it in moments like this. Unrecorded but real. The way she's steadying his breath simply by standing near him. The court buzzes about the prince constantly. Nobles crowd corridors trying to glimpse him. Courtiers speculate about what kind of child he'll become. Some insist he already has the decisive gaze of a king. Others whisper he resembles the Yorkist side, lighter, fairer, softer. A few Lancastrian loyalists mutter jokes about too much white rose in the cradle. But only when they're certain no one important is listening. One little known detail surfaces as you lean in. The infant prince supposedly had a peculiar habit of grabbing nearby objects with surprising strength. Fingers curling around scepters. Ribbons. Even a courtier's expensive velvet sleeve. Nurses giggle about it, claiming he's already ready to take hold of destiny. You can't help smiling. Babies and symbolism go together too easily. As the months pass, you follow Prince Henry through the early rhythms of royal childhood. Lessons begin earlier than seems reasonable. Latin phrases murmured over toys. Prayers whispered into sleepy ears. Early etiquette demonstrated with patient smiles by Elizabeth. He toddles along palace corridors. Tiny boots tapping softly on stone. Chasing sunlight and sometimes the terrified palace cats. Henry VII keeps a watchful distance. Not cold, simply cautious. You sense the weight of responsibility pressing on him. This child is more than a son. He is the anchor of Tudor legitimacy. The living proof of the union between Lancaster and York. The symbol England can grow around. And yet, in quieter moments, Henry VII lets the father in him slip through. You see him lift the boy with careful hands. Hear him speak softly in Welsh, ancestral lullabies carried from the hills of his youth. The prince listens, blue eyes wide, as though the sound maps something in his soul. Still, royal childhood is never simple. Expectations gather early. You step into a grand chamber one afternoon where tutors demonstrate early military exercises using carved wooden figurines. The boy watches with intense focus. Brow slightly furrowed, a tutor explains the Battle of Toten with tiny soldiers arranged across the table. And little Henry moves them around impatiently, reorganizing the formations in ways that shock the tutor into silence. Elizabeth hides a smile behind her hand. Henry VII raises an eyebrow. Some historians still debate whether these stories were exaggerated later to foreshadow his future assertiveness. But standing here, seeing the spark in the child's eyes, you suspect there's truth woven into the tale. Court life wraps around the prince like a tapestry, rich, demanding, ornate, feasts where he sits beside his mother, legs dangling above the floor, trying to follow conversations far too complex for his age, ceremonies where he's lifted into view so subjects can cheer his presence, religious festivals where he toddles after clergy, mimicking their gestures with charming solemnity. But beneath the innocence lies pressure. Everyone watches, everyone judges, everyone projects their hopes onto him. The older courtiers compare him constantly to his older brother, Arthur, the heir apparent, the quiet, delicate, thoughtful boy who already bears the mantle of kingship in training. Arthur is the carefully shaped prince. Henry is the exuberant one, the stubborn one, the one with laughter that echoes through the halls like a short drumroll announcing trouble. Arthur is watercolor. Henry is bold ink. The differences matter. A kingdom always tries to guess which child will become what. You sense the subtle tension between expectation and personality shaping Prince Henry's earliest years. One day, you find him in the palace gardens, running after a wooden hoop while a flustered nurse tries to keep up. He laughs brightly, wildly, so unlike the restrained elegance of court. Henry VII watches from a balcony, half horrified, half amused. Elizabeth nudges him gently, whispering something that loosens his stern posture. The boy is alive, healthy, energetic, everything a dynasty as fragile as the Tudors needs. But childhood under a crown is never purely innocent. You see early hints of pride in Prince Henry, the kind that comes from constant attention. From knowing every bow, every smile, every whispered compliment is aimed at him. When Arthur enters a room, people bow respectfully. When Henry enters, they bow and grin. He brings warmth the way Arthur brings calm. It shapes him. And yet, there is tenderness too. You witness a quiet moment one evening when Arthur reads aloud from a book. Voice soft, careful, Henry leans against him, listening with wide-eyed fascination. The brothers' hands occasionally brush. Their bond woven from shared expectation and sibling affection more genuine than politics can touch. Elizabeth stands in the doorway watching them, her expression soft as candlelight. For all the grandeur, all the symbolism, all the pressure, the children are still children, and you feel the kingdom's future pulsing gently within these small, unguarded moments. The prince grows, laughs, learns, demands attention, collects little victories, throws occasional tantrums impressive enough to make visiting ambassadors question Tudor stability. But every day, he becomes more firmly rooted in the idea of kingship. Not as something he earns, as something he is. The making of a prince is not a single moment. It's a long, delicate sculpting of character, of expectation, of identity. And here, walking through the palace with the boy's footsteps echoing beside you, you realize this shaping will ripple across England in ways no one can yet imagine. The Tudors are no longer just securing a throne. They're shaping the next one. And the child at the center of it all is already learning how to command a room simply by entering it. You sense it almost immediately, the shift from the bright, bustling energy of the young Tudor household to something quieter, heavier, more fragile. Court life continues with its usual swirl of music, feasts, murmuring nobles, and ceremonial obligations, but beneath all that motion lies a tremor, a thin crack in the foundation, a reminder that even a rising dynasty is made of human breath, human bones, human limits, and those limits are beginning to show. Arthur, the golden heir, grows taller, more graceful, more princely by the month, but you notice a softness around his shoulders, a frailty that lingers in the way he sits, in the careful way he moves. His tutors praise his brilliance, his courtesy, his discipline, but when he coughs, the room stiffens. When he tires too quickly, eyes flicker with concern. Prince Henry, in contrast, bounds through corridors like a comet made of stubbornness and noise, colliding with servants, laughter spiraling behind him like a banner. The contrast between the brothers becomes sharper. One delicate, one unstoppable, one shaped for expectation, one shaped by impulse. And the kingdom watches. You walk through the palace gardens where Elizabeth of York strolls with both boys. Arthur holds her arm gently, expression thoughtful, voice calm. Henry runs ahead, chasing a butterfly with such ferocity you momentarily fear for the butterfly's life. Elizabeth smiles softly, but the smile dims when she looks back at Arthur. Her hand tightens on his. You feel the worry humming beneath her ribcage. Elizabeth herself is not unburdened. She has given birth many times, joy and grief woven together. Not all the Tudor children survived infancy. The losses sit quietly behind her eyes. Shadows in a gaze once bright enough to steady a kingdom. You've seen her pause near the chapel candles, smoothing her gown absent-mindedly, breathing long and slow as if coaxing her heart to keep its shape. Henry VII senses all this. Of course he does. His attention is a net cast across the entire realm, and his family sits at the very center. But kingship doesn't allow softness. Not outwardly, so he observes in silence, measuring risks like a man counting coins, carefully, methodically, hoping the sums don't reveal a deficit too large to face. Still, the dynasty is young, too young to crack, too young to bend under grief. And yet, the cracks appear anyway. One quiet detail emerges, one most histories gloss over. Prince Arthur, for all his solemn intelligence, had a fascination with mechanical toys, tiny carved animals that moved when winding a metal key. He collected them obsessively. You once find him seated by a window, pale sunlight brushing over his face, as he winds a small wooden lion to make it walk in uneven steps. His smile is gentle, distant, a child's smile, but the effort exhausts him faster than it should. You feel the weight of fragility in the room. Prince Henry bursts in a moment later, loud as thunder, startling both his brother and the toy lion into stillness. The younger boy grabs it, winds it too tightly, and breaks the mechanism with a cheerful lack of concern. Arthur's face falls, not angry, just resigned. Elizabeth sighs. You sense the symbol there, too on the nose to voice aloud. Life, even royal life, breaks easily. And the Tudors know it. As seasons pass, worry begins to settle in the palace like dust. Arthur's health fluctuates. Elizabeth's pregnancies strain her thin frame. Henry VII grows increasingly tight-lipped, his gaze sharpening with every small reminder that the dynasty he fought so ruthlessly to build is far more fragile than he'd ever allow his enemies to see. Some historians still debate whether Henry VII's near-obsessive frugality and control during these years stemmed from political caution or from this quiet fear of losing the people he cared for. You walk through the dim corridors with him at night, his footsteps soft but purposeful, and you feel the truth leaning toward both. Power is only comforting when you have something left to lose. And Henry has everything to lose now. You follow him into the council chamber where ambassadors from Spain present formal agreements for Arthur's marriage to Catherine of Aragon. The hall gleams with polished wood, golden embroidery, and the scent of fresh beeswax candles. The arrangement is political brilliance. England gains legitimacy, alliance, prestige. The room buzzes with optimism. But beneath it all, something trembles. You watch Arthur bow politely, speak with grace, embody everything a future king should be. Yet his hands shake slightly. His breath catches once, barely noticeable, but Henry VII notices. Elizabeth notices. You notice, and the fear settles. Unwelcome but undeniable. Prince Henry, still young, still wide-eyed, watches all of this with a curiosity that borders on hunger. He sees the attention Arthur receives, the expectations, the titles, the subtle deference. He watches with admiration, yes, but also with a spark of something else. Something that will one day reshape an entire kingdom. The fragility in this dynasty isn't just physical. It's emotional, psychological. Every breath the royal family takes seems tethered to the kingdom's future. Every cough, every distant look, every small shadow under someone's eyes casts a ripple. Then winter comes. The cold sinks into the stones of the palace. Fires burn constantly, but the air still chills your bones. Arthur departs for Ludlow Castle with Catherine, beginning his life as Prince of Wales in earnest. You watch him ride out through frost-touched fields. Catherine beside him, both wrapped in heavy cloaks. Their breaths coil in pale clouds. The castle becomes their new home, a place for governance, learning, building the foundations of future rule. But the air there is damp, unsteady, and winter illnesses bloom easily in such stone-bound chill. News arrives slowly at first. Arthur is unwell, then very unwell, then dangerously unwell. Henry VII grows stiller than stone. Elizabeth, normally so composed, goes pale beneath her crown. Prince Henry stands in the doorway of a council meeting, listening with wide, frightened eyes as advisors murmur grim updates. The messenger who finally arrives from Ludlow carries more silence than words. Arthur is dead. The moment lands like a blow that fractures the Tudors from within. You feel the world tilt. The kingdom tilt. The future tilt. Elizabeth collapses into grief. Her cries raw and unrestrained. Echoes that cling to the rafters long after she falls silent. Henry VII withdraws so far into himself that even his closest advisors cannot reach him. England mourns, unsure whether the Tudor line can survive such a loss so early in its life. And young Prince Henry, he stands in the shadows, watching the world change around him. The attention that once belonged to Arthur shifts toward him like a sudden beam of light. Heavy, unexpected, unforgiving. The fragile roots of the Tudor dynasty tremble. But they do not break. Not yet. The kingdom breathes in again, shaky but determined. Because there is another Tudor prince. A different one. A louder one. A brighter one. And the eyes of England begin to turn toward him. The grief from Arthur's death doesn't fade so much as seep into the walls, staining the air of the Tudor court with a quiet, persistent ache. You feel it in the corridors, those long stone passageways where footsteps echo a little too sharply, where conversations drift into uneasy silences. Elizabeth of York moves through the palace like a ghost of gentleness. Her resilience wearing thin, Henry VII grows more rigid, wrapped in layers of caution, calculation, and a sorrow he refuses to name. But it's the way the world begins to reposition itself around young Prince Henry that you feel most deeply. The shift is subtle at first, like a curtain stirring before a draft becomes a wind, but soon it's unmistakable. Arthur is gone. The dynasty's future, fragile as spun sugar, pivots toward the younger son, the spirited prince with restless eyes and a laugh that still echoes down the halls like he hasn't yet understood the weight settling onto him. Catherine of Aragon remains in England after Arthur's death, widowed at 16. Surrounded by courtiers she barely knows. Her future suspended in a political limbo sharp enough to cut. You follow her through the cold chambers where she kneels in prayer. Spanish missals open, whispering petitions in a dialect soft and musical. Loss clings to her shoulders like a second mantle. She and Prince Henry cross paths often in these months, not as lovers or even future spouses, but as two young people tethered uneasily to the machinery of dynastic survival. You watch their earliest interactions unfold in the shadow of grief rather than romance. In one of the palace gardens, Catherine stands alone among the frost-bitten roses. Prince Henry approaches awkwardly, scuffing the gravel with his boot. He's just a boy, still rounding the edges of adolescence, cheeks not yet carved into the shape of future portraits. He offers condolences in a voice that wavers slightly, not from insincerity, but from the strangeness of comforting someone tied so intimately to the brother he has now lost. Catherine thanks him with a quiet grace, a softness, a dignity that feels too old for her years. Standing between them, you sense something delicate, a mutual understanding born from loss rather than affection. Not passion, not yet, just two young souls trying to make sense of the spaces tragedy has created. But outside this small human moment, the political world sharpens its claws. Henry VII, ever the strategist, begins to consider what must happen next. Catherine's marriage to Arthur was a cornerstone of the Anglo-Spanish alliance, a cornerstone that cannot simply crumble without consequences. And so, despite grief still wet on the kingdom's lips, discussions arise about Catherine's future. Specifically, whether she might marry the new heir, young Henry. This idea does not drift through the court politely, it crashes through it. Some courtiers whisper approval, others mutter about canon law, papal dispensations, and whether Catherine's marriage to Arthur was ever consummated. The truth behind that question becomes a political hinge so delicate and so absurdly intrusive that you can't help wincing as strangers pick apart the private lives of teenagers to determine international diplomacy. Catherine insists the marriage was never consummated. Her duenna confirms it. Spanish ambassadors support it. But Henry VII doesn't rely on assurances. He relies on what benefits the crown. His mind calculates faster than any abacus could track. Some historians still debate whether Henry VII sincerely believed Catherine's statement or whether he simply found it convenient to believe. Knowing him now, you suspect he held the answer in a locked compartment of his mind. One labeled truth, useful only when needed. The young prince, meanwhile, is caught in the slow-forming tide of expectation. You watch him at lessons, trying to focus on Latin declensions while the whispers drift like smoke around him. He grows more aware each day of how the world is beginning to shape him, not as a carefree second son, but as England's breathing future. He's still a boy, though. You see it in the way he jokes with his companions, in the competitive gleam in his eyes when sparring with wooden swords, in the way he races down corridors despite the scandalized gasps of Tudors. But beneath the brightness, something heavier begins to anchor him. One evening, you find him alone in the royal library, reading a book far too dense for someone his age, a treatise on kingship. Its margins filled with notes from previous monarchs. Henry traces the underlined phrases with a quiet intensity, his fingers brushing words he's beginning to realize will soon define him. Destiny is settling around his shoulders like a cloak he hasn't yet grown tall enough to wear. Catherine sits in her chambers nearby, surrounded by letters from Spain filled with diplomatic tension and maternal concern. She reads Arthur's last messages, sometimes simple notes, earnest notes, her eyes glossing with a grief that still bruises her spirit. Her future is uncertain, her finances strained, her position precarious. But the conversations continue. Henry VII meets with ambassadors, clerics, legal scholars. The question of Catherine's potential remarriage becomes the central axis of Tudor diplomacy. And Prince Henry, still too young to openly shape these decisions, absorbs the discussions like an apprentice silently learning a craft. In one meeting you witness from the corner of the chamber, he sits slightly behind his father, observing closely. Catherine's name comes up. The possibility of a dispensation from Rome is mentioned. The prince's expression tightens, not with desire, not with fear, but with the dawning clarity that he is no longer living a life shaped by his own impulses. His life will be shaped by necessity. At a feast some months later, Catherine sits across the hall, dressed in a gown of deep crimson, embroidered meticulously. She appears composed, radiant even, but her eyes give away the exhaustion of a young woman stranded between kingdoms. Prince Henry glances at her occasionally, curious, respectful, perhaps even a little protective. But nothing more. Not yet. The court interprets these glances as prophecy. They always do. But you, walking between them, sense the distance, the uncertainty, the weight of decision that sits not in hearts, but in councils. Then winter returns, cold, sharp, echoing the winter that took Arthur. Henry VII grows more withdrawn, consumed by calculations. Elizabeth of York, worn from grief and many childbirths, falls gravely ill. You walk beside her sickbed, feeling the air heavy with dread. Henry VII's face cracks, not publicly, but in rare private moments where he grips the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles pale. Elizabeth dies. Her absence carves a hollow in the palace that nothing fills. The king is shattered beneath his stoicism. Catherine mourns a second mother. And young Prince Henry, robbed of the gentlest anchor in his world, begins to harden in subtle, lasting ways. The path toward marrying Catherine doesn't become clearer. It becomes heavier. Yet the line of possibility remains. Drawn not by the boy, not by the widow, but by the crown's need. And the kingdom waits, breath held, watching two young lives being shaped by forces far larger than their own. Their story is only beginning to pivot. And you can feel the hinge tightening. You can feel the shift gathering long before the court does. Long before ambassadors begin wringing their hands. Long before priests start whispering anxious prayers beneath their breaths. It begins quietly, like a candle sputtering in a draft. A tension, a pressure, a thread pulled too tight for too long. And at the center of it stands Henry, no longer the bright, laughing boy racing through corridors, but a man carved into power, expectation, and the relentless weight of being England's second chance at stability. Years have passed since Elizabeth's death hollowed the palace halls. Henry VII has aged into a shadow of the cautious strategist he once was. And young Henry, now Henry VIII, rises where his father slowly withdraws. You feel the shift in authority seeping through the chambers, fooling around the younger king long before the crown formally touches him. But long before his rule becomes the storm historians love to dramatize. The hinge moment begins with something painfully simple. Henry VIII wants a son. Not a desire born of ego, though ego will eventually feast here, but a desire born of dynastic fear. The Tudors are still a sapling, not an oak. A single strong wind could uproot them. And Catherine of Aragon, now his queen, has given him only one surviving child, Mary. Catherine herself moves through the palace with a regal dignity carved from endurance. Years have shaped her, tightened her resolve, deepened her faith. You watch her kneeling before altars, whispering prayers that ache with sincerity. She has weathered miscarriages, stillbirths, and political strain with a grace that silences even her detractors. But grace does not guarantee a son. Henry watches her with a blend of affection, frustration, and something heavier, fear disguised as confidence. You sense it in the way he lingers over documents regarding succession. In the way he stares too long at his daughter as if trying to imagine her wielding the crown in a world that refuses to accept female sovereignty. The pressure coils inside him, tightening with each passing year. A strange detail emerges here. A private worry Henry carries and never speaks aloud. He blames himself as much as Catherine for their lack of sons. He reads medical texts in secret, searching for explanations medieval science cannot provide. His frustration becomes a shadow following him across council chambers and hunting fields. And then the hinge turns. Henry meets Anne Boleyn. You feel the electricity in the moment even before the court does. Anne's presence crackles with ambition wrapped in charm. She is clever, educated, deeply aware of her own allure. She speaks boldly, laughs fearlessly, and refuses the king's early advances in a way no one else ever has. Not out of disdain, but out of strategy. Henry is captivated. But the heart of what happens next isn't seduction. It's justification. If Anne had been merely a distraction, history would have swallowed her quietly. But Henry begins to believe something deeper, something that gnaws at him with theological insistence. That his marriage to Catherine was invalid in God's eyes. That their failure to produce a son is divine proof. That he has lived in sin because Catherine was once married to his brother. Historians still debate whether Henry truly believed this or simply found belief convenient. You stand beside him in late-night library sessions as he pores over scripture with the fervor of a man searching for cosmic permission. And you sense the truth. He believes because he needs to. Conviction becomes oxygen. He summons theologians, debates scholars, writes treatises with his own hand, rare for a king. Catherine responds with equal conviction, grounding her argument in faith, loyalty, and the memory of a marriage she insists was never consummated with Arthur. Their private conversations grow increasingly strained. You feel the tenderness between them thinning like parchment stretched too far. Catherine's eyes darken with exhaustion. Henry's grow colder, sharper, more determined. And Rome? Rome hesitates. Pope Clement VII stalls. Caught in the political vice between Henry and Catherine's powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who will not permit his aunt to be discarded like an inconvenient footnote. Diplomacy tangles, knots, unravels, knots again. Henry grows impatient. Very impatient. You walk with him through council meetings where advisors argue cautiously. Cardinal Wolsey, once his closest ally, tries and fails to deliver the annulment, and Henry's disappointment calcifies into anger. The king who once loved Wolsey now watches him with the weary disgust of a man realizing a tool has grown dull. Pressure builds. Then one evening, in a dim chamber smelling of ink and old wood, the idea is spoken aloud for the first time. Break from Rome. It arrives not as thunder, but as a whisper, a dangerous, impossible, treasonous whisper. You feel the chill ripple through the room. The scholars who suggested do so carefully, like men poking the edge of a blade. But once the idea enters Henry's mind, it begins to grow. Because the truth is simple. If Rome won't grant what Henry believes is righteous, Henry will grant it himself. The first cracks appear gently. A sermon here, a legal argument there, pamphlets circulated quietly, clergymen sympathetic to reform gain influence. Parliament becomes a testing ground for new ideas. Then comes the boldness. Henry declares himself the supreme head of the Church of England, though at first he couches it in cautious phrasing, as far as the law of Christ allows. The phrase is the political equivalent of leaving half a foot outside the doorway. But soon, the footsteps fully in. Monasteries begin to tremble, figuratively at first, then literally, their lands eyed, their wealth measured, their loyalties questioned. A kingdom built for centuries on Catholic tradition begins to tilt, sway, question itself. The air changes. People whisper with both hope and dread. And Catherine? She refuses to yield. You watch her stand before legal commissions with fire in her chest and sorrow in her eyes. She calls Henry her true husband. She defends her marriage with dignity carved from faith. Her voice never cracks, even when her heart surely does. The court shifts around her, some turning cold, others turning sympathetic but helpless. Mary, caught painfully in between, clings to her mother with a devotion that will shape her future in ways neither of them can yet see. Anne becomes the sun of Henry's world, and Catherine the distant twilight. But even as Henry moves toward his chosen destiny, you sense the kingdom quiver under the strain. Priests uncertain, nobles divided, common folk muttering about heresy, loyalty, fear of divine punishment. And yet Henry pushes forward, as if he is no longer just a king, but a force of nature. As if the break with Rome is not simply a political act, but a necessity carved into him since the moment he realized his dynasty could wither without a son. The crown has shifted. The kingdom has shifted. The church has shifted. And you feel the world tilting into a new era, one that hums with both promise and peril. The break with Rome is not complete yet. But the crack has widened. And soon, nothing will be the same. You feel the crack before you hear it, the way the ground subtly shifts when deep stone begins to fracture. The break with Rome isn't a single moment. It's a spreading fault line. And now, walking beside Henry as he tightens his grip on the reins of both crown and church, you feel the aftershocks shudder through every layer of England. The kingdom is changing. Not loudly at first, but relentlessly. And you sense it in everyday things, like the way people look over their shoulders before speaking, or how priests sigh a little too long before sermons, or how even the palace walls seem to hold their breath, waiting for someone to name the tremor they all feel. Henry, meanwhile, moves through it with the confidence of a man convinced the tremor is not danger but destiny. Parliament passes the Act of Supremacy, making Henry the supreme head of the Church of England. The words land like a hammer blow, quiet but final. It feels as though a cord connecting England to centuries of religious tradition has been cut. Not cleanly, jaggedly, sparks flying from the tear. Catherine refuses to acknowledge it. Anne celebrates it. The kingdom trembles under it. You walk with Henry through the halls where legal clerks scramble to rewrite the framework of English faith, new titles, new loyalties, new laws. The crown absorbs spiritual authority like a sponge soaking up spilled wine. Henry thrives on the consolidation. It sharpens him, straightens his spine. It makes his confidence swell in ways both impressive and alarming. But the people, they don't shift so easily. You step into a tavern in Kent where murmurs ripple through the smoky air. One man whispers that Rome will retaliate. Another mutters that England risks divine wrath. A woman stirs her ale thoughtfully, saying she just wants to know whether the feast days have changed. Her tone is not sarcastic, just overwhelmed. Real lives are being reshaped by decisions made in gilded chambers. And not everyone knows how to adapt. And far from the taverns, in quiet monastic cloisters, the real shock begins. Henry sets his sights on the monasteries, not for theological reasons, though he frames it that way, but for wealth, land, power. The monasteries are rich in all three. And Henry's new advisor, Thomas Cromwell, sees opportunity. Huge opportunity. You follow Cromwell through records, surveys, inspections. He carries himself with a kind of steely focus, calm, courteous, and quietly ruthless. He is the architect of change every bit as much as Henry is the engine. The dissolution of the monasteries begins. At first, small houses fall, those with only a handful of monks or nuns. Some monasteries surrender meekly, others resist in prayer, not rebellion. You watch monks pack belongings with trembling hands, tears slipping down faces etched with decades of routine and devotion. The sound of footsteps echoing through empty cloisters feels like ghosts pacing. A lesser-known truth emerges as you drift through these quiet ruins. Some monasteries hid small relics or manuscripts inside hollowed beams or buried beneath chapel floors, praying one day they might be returned to sanctuary. Many remain undiscovered to this day, tucked beneath centuries of dust. But the dissolution doesn't remain quiet. Henry's commissioners begin closing larger houses. Wealth flows into the crown, gold chalices, tapestries, land deeds, livestock, even ornate candlesticks. Cromwell catalogues it all with meticulous precision. The crown expands, but the spiritual vacuum deepens. England feels unmoored. The familiar rhythms, monastic bells, prayers at dawn, free alms for the poor, begin to fade. People feel the absence like a pulled tooth. The pain lingers in the space left behind. Some historians still debate whether Henry understood the cultural upheaval he was causing or whether he saw only the political benefits. You, walking beside him, sense he understood enough to justify the risk, but not enough to foresee the depth of the wounds. Peasants in the north mutter angrily. Gentry in the south weigh opportunities. Churchmen walk cautiously, robes brushing against uncertainty. And through all this, Anne Boleyn rises in influence, sharp, vibrant, determined, and equally controversial. Her supporters glow with hope for a reformed England. Her detractors whisper that she is the architect of chaos. And hovering over everything is the growing tension around her failure, so far, to give Henry a son. The aftershocks ripple through the royal household too. Mary, Catherine's daughter, refuses to accept her own demotion from princess to lady. You watch her move through the palace with quiet dignity that frays each time a guard or servant hesitates before addressing her, unsure which title is safer. Catherine herself is forced from court, exiled to remote estates. Her health wanes under the strain. Henry speaks less of her, but you feel her shadows slip into the spaces between his decisions. She remains a quiet ache in his life, one he refuses to acknowledge. Anne, meanwhile, moves into the sunlight of queenship, but the ground beneath her is far from stable. She senses the pressure, the expectation, the scrutiny. Each time she fails to carry a pregnancy to term, The tremor deepens. And then there's the king himself. You stand beside him in the royal chapel one evening as he prays, softly, urgently, forehead pressed to clasped hands. The candlelight flickers over his features, revealing lines that weren't there a few years ago. Stress has carved itself into him like a sculptor working fast and rough. He whispers for guidance, for reassurance, for a sign he is not leading England into ruin. Outside, Cromwell arranges the next closures. Anne adjusts the next proclamation. Mary writes letters to her mother in defiance of royal orders. And the kingdom continues to rumble. In the north, resentment grows into something larger. You travel with Henry's envoys to Yorkshire, where tensions flicker like embers. Villagers grumble about broken traditions. Former monks wander homeless. Priests whisper about loyalty torn in two directions, crown or church. A rebellion brews. It will come soon. It will shake the realm. It will force Henry to confront the human cost of his revolution. But not yet. Tonight, you walk with him through silent hallways, tapestries swaying gently, torches hissing. He moves with a heavy gait, burdened but resolute. Behind him, the country reshapes itself. Ahead of him, uncertainty stretches like a long, dark corridor. The break with Rome has been made. The aftershocks are spreading. And the kingdom, faithful, frightened, furious, follows him into the unknown. You can feel the kingdom trembling even before the first banners rise in the north, an undercurrent of unrest woven through the fields, villages, and abbey ruins like a cold wind threading the seams of England itself. The break with Rome was a fracture, the dissolution was a wound. And wounds, when deep enough, don't stay quiet, they flare. They rebel. And here, in the late autumn murk, you feel that spark burst into a flame. It begins in Yorkshire, where fields lie brown and sleeping, and where the absence of monastic charity hits hardest. Farmers mutter as they mend tools. Parish priests sigh over half-empty pews and prayers that feel increasingly unsafe to speak aloud. Bread is thinner. Alms are scarcer, and the spiritual rhythm that once anchored their days has snapped. Then one morning in 1536, the silence breaks. A procession gathers, torches, banners painted with the 5 wounds of Christ, villagers and gentry marching shoulder to shoulder. Their breath clouds in the cold air. Their voices rise. Not in chaos but in grim unity. They call themselves pilgrims, not rebels. It is the pilgrimage of grace. You stand among them for a moment, feeling the thrum of anger braided with faith. These people don't crave war. They crave the world they knew, the world Henry's reforms shattered. Their leaders speak of restoration, of returning to old laws, of ending Cromwell's influence. They want the monasteries back. They want Catherine treated with respect. They want Mary restored to her rightful place. But most of all, they want the tremor beneath their feet to stop. Henry hears of the rising while in Windsor, and you feel the fire ignite behind his composed expression. Not panic, he rarely panics. Anger, the kind that simmers hot and quiet before erupting. He summons Cromwell, Norfolk, and every advisor who might tell him what he doesn't want to hear. Henry believes, truly believes, that the rebellion is not a symptom but an insult. A challenge to his authority. a betrayal of the unity he's fighting to create. The more he thinks about it, the more the anger coils, ready to strike. But he cannot simply crush the revolt, not yet. The rebels number tens of thousands. And they have support from nobles normally too cautious to risk defiance. So Henry does something unexpected. He negotiates. You watch Norfolk ride north with royal promises laden like fruit. Pardon, Parliament, a willingness to listen. It's diplomacy wrapped in velvet, soft and persuasive, and the rebels, hungry, uncertain, exhausted, accept. For now. But Henry doesn't forget. And he never forgives rebellion. When the uprising flares again months later, weakened and incoordinated, Henry seizes the moment. He answers not with velvet but with iron. Executions, hangings, heads displayed on town gates like grim punctuation. The message is unmistakable. The Tudors bend for no one. The aftershocks of the rebellion settle eventually. But something has changed in Henry. You sense it as he walks through the palace gardens, his gait heavier, his thoughts sharper, his patience thinner. The king who once prayed for guidance now trusts only in force, strategy, and his own interpretation of God's will. This is not the bright, eager boy you met in the early palace halls. This is a monarch shaped by fear, of rebellion, of failure, of dying without a son. And the kingdom? It bends around him. Anne Boleyn's fall follows soon after, swift, bloody, devastating, another aftershock, another fracture, and through it all, the Tudor crown continues shifting its weight. But the legacy forming here, the one you feel humming beneath your feet, isn't just Henry's doom-laden personal saga. It's the architecture of a dynasty. A structure rising unevenly but undeniably strong. You walk the palace halls as Jane Seymour becomes queen. Quiet and gentle where Anne was fierce and brilliant. Her calm presence soothes the court like warm milk poured into a boiling pot. And when she gives Henry the son he longed for, Prince Edward, the king cries openly. Relief, gratitude, fear, the emotions tumble out of him like stones loosened from a cliff. England breathes again. For a moment. But Jane's death shortly after Edward's birth leaves another scar, one Henry will carry. Heavy and unhealed, for the rest of his life. You see him stand at her bedside long after she's gone. Silent. Hands clasped behind his back as though holding himself together by sheer force of will. The Tudor legacy grows from joy and grief entwined. Edward becomes the hope for continuity. Mary, the steadfast daughter of Catherine, becomes the symbol of old faith. Elizabeth, the brilliant daughter of Anne, becomes the promise of something new. Sharp, and resilient. 3 children. 3 futures. 3 forces that will one day remake England again and again. You sense their early personalities forming like faint brushstrokes on a canvas. Edward, serious, curious, fragile yet fierce in intellect. Mary, devoted, earnest, with faith that fortifies her like steel. Elizabeth, observant, quick, calculating, already a master at listening more than she speaks. Henry gathers them at court occasionally. Though rarely all together, you see him look at them with a complicated mix of pride, regret, and fierce protectiveness. Each child represents a piece of his legacy. Pieces that will outlive him. reshape his decisions, and carry the Tudor banner long after his own story ends. The king grows older, heavier, more set in his convictions. Cromwell falls, a victim to the same ruthless machinery he helped create. His rise and sudden execution are reminders that Henry's England rewards brilliance only until brilliance threatens independence. Another aftershock. The kingdom continues shifting as Henry remarries Anna of Cleves. Then Catherine Howard, then Catherine Parr. Each marriage leaves its own mark on the realm. Diplomatic bridges built or burned. Factions strengthened or destroyed. Alliances formed or severed. But you notice something else, something subtle but powerful. Despite all turbulence, despite all cruelty, despite all reforms and reversals, England strengthens. Not because of harmony, because of structure. The Tudor institutions, centralized monarchy, reorganized church, expanded bureaucracy, set roots. Administrative systems grow more intricate. Parliament becomes more assertive. Literacy spreads. Trade expands. Naval power rises. The country becomes something new, less like medieval England, more like the early modern state it will soon become. This, you realize, is the real legacy evolving beneath Henry's reign. Not the wives. Not the scandals. Not even the break with Rome alone. But the forging of a government capable of surviving kings, rebellions, and reforms. A kingdom too structured to collapse. Too adaptable to shatter. Too centralized to be undone by any single catastrophe. And as Henry ages into a figure both feared and mythologized, you feel England settling, slowly, into a shape that will define it for centuries. A shape the Tudors carved. Roughly. Violently. Enduringly. And though the dynasty's future will still twist through triumph and tragedy, the foundation is here, beneath your feet, steadying itself at last. For the first time in a long time, the tremor quiets. Not because the kingdom is healed, but because it has learned how to stand even while shaking. You feel the weight of Henry's years before you see it, the way the chambers seem dimmer now. The way the courtiers walk more quietly. The way the air itself moves with a slower, heavier rhythm. The Tudor king who once strode through palaces with thunder in his step now moves with the gravity of a man who has carried a kingdom on his back far longer than any one lifetime should allow. His body has thickened, his leg, ulcerated and unhealed, throbs with every step. His temper, once flaring like a struck match, now simmers low and dangerous, predictable only in its unpredictability. And yet the fire inside him has not gone out. It has simply changed color. Burning darker, deeper, more internal. You walk with him through a long gallery lit by winter light. Servants keep their distance. Advisors hover. The air smells faintly of herbs meant to mask infection. And something else. Something like the slow fading of a mighty force. But the kingdom around him? It no longer wavers. It stands. Even as Henry dims, the structures he forged continue to hold steady, the bureaucracy, the centralized crown, the ecclesiastical authority reshaped into something England can navigate without Rome's compass. The dynasty may have begun in mud on Bosworth's field, but now it stands on stone, cut, laid, and reinforced by decades of ambition and fear. You watch as Henry signs documents with hands that tremble slightly, as he debates policy with bursts of clarity that hit like lightning strikes before fading into exhaustion. As he summons his children, not often together, but each in turn. Edward, pale but brilliant, already more scholar than boy, absorbing governance like breath. Mary, earnest and devout, carrying her mother's shadow like a quiet shield. Elizabeth, bright-eyed, observant, calculating with an intuition so sharp it almost hums around her. Henry studies them with a mixture of pride, worry, and a dawning awareness that the world he built will soon belong to them. His legacy, messy, magnificent, terrifying, rests in hands shaped by entirely different futures. Sometimes he asks to see the crown, not to wear it, just to look at it. And you understand why. Because he remembers the battlefield, the mud, the broken metal offered to him after Richard's fall. He remembers the trembling weight of the dynasty before it had roots. He remembers the ghosts, the pretenders, the rebellions, the alliances made in shadows. And he remembers Catherine, and Anne, and Jane, and all the women whose lives braided into his rule. He remembers the boy he was. He fears the man he became. And he wonders what the historians, those ghostly future watchers, will say of him. You feel the long night settling slowly. His strength thins like old parchment. His voice softens, though the steel never fully leaves it. He speaks more to priests now, not Roman but English, asking questions about sin, salvation, sovereignty. The theology he once wielded now weighs on him differently. One evening, you sit with him as he gazes into a fire that crackles like distant echoes of battles long buried. He murmurs about Arthur, his gentle firstborn, about Catherine, steadfast even in exile, about Elizabeth, patient and wise until the end. You sense the old griefs glowing beneath the surface, shaping him even now. But he also speaks of triumph, of the navy he expanded, England's growing teeth against the world, of Parliament, no longer a formality, but a partner in governance, of his children, each a different future waiting to unfold, of the Tudor rose, once a symbol, now an inheritance. As his breath grows shallower, the court tiptoes around the truth they dare not speak aloud. The king is fading, and the night, long and heavy, draws close. You sit with him as he drifts in and out of sleep, muttering half-formed memories, snow falling at Greenwich, the smell of Welsh heather, the thunder of Bosworth, a wooden lion his brother once wounded too tightly. His past spills gently into the present, a tapestry loosening thread by thread. When the final moment comes, it arrives quietly. No thunder, no proclamation, just a slow exhale, a release, like a great weight slipping from the world's shoulders. The crown is set aside. The kingdom does not fall. The Tudors endure. And as the night settles, you feel the world hum softly with the knowledge that a chapter has ended, and another waits to rise with the dawn. End of script. Sweet dreams.